Yeah, Kinju, we have joined the room. Yeah. Can you hear us, Amna?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Yeah. Can we do the sound check from your end as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
विप्लव तो थोड़ा नीचे करना. No, you're.
Hi, Mayank. Can you hear us?
Yeah, loud.
Okay, super. Cool. So we'll see you. If you could join, like.
Sorry.
करेंगे
Okay.
Start the session on time. Please be seated. Once again, a polite reminder to all of you to please keep your mobile phones on silent. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is an announcement for everyone who can hear me in the lunch area as well as outside the ballroom. May I request you to please come and take seats in the Jasmine room for the next session, which starts at 2:30 p.m. on infusing new life into green development. Thank you very much. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be starting at sharp 2:30 p.m., which is why the announcement to request your presence in the Jasmine room as early as possible. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome. May I request you to please join us in Jasmine Room. We're going to be starting at 2:30 sharp with our next session, Infusing New Life into Green Development. May I request you to kindly be seated. We need and we seek your cooperation in getting us on time. I request you, ladies and gentlemen, to please be seated so that we can start the proceedings on time at 2:30 p.m. Thank you very much. This is an announcement for everyone who's in the lunch area as well as outside Jasmine Room to please come and make themselves comfortable in the Jasmine Room so that we can start on time at 2:30 p.m. sharp. Thank you very much once again. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a warm welcome once again. May I request your presence in Jasmine Room, which is adjacent to the lunch area. I request you to please be seated so that we can start with our next session on time. The next session is themed Infusing New Life into Green Development. May I request you to please come and take seats, ladies and gentlemen. We will be starting very shortly. This is an announcement, ladies and gentlemen, for all those of you who are outside and can hear me, as also for those of you who are in the lunch area. May I request you, ladies and gentlemen, to grace the Jasmine Room now, because we're going to be starting with this next session, Infusing New Life into Green Development, very shortly. Thank you. Please do join us in the Jasmine Room, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Post that lunch break, I request your presence in the Jasmine Room, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can start the proceedings in a timely manner. May I request you to please be seated. A polite reminder to all of you to please keep your mobile phones on silent. I would also like to apprise you of this event's hashtag G20 India. I'm going to request and urge you to please use the hashtag G20 India across all your social media platforms to take the message from this event far and wide. May I urge you to please tweet and share messages across your social media platforms using the hashtag G20 India. Thank you very much for joining us back in the room. I invite all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to please be seated in the Jasmine Room. May I invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to be seated in the Jasmine Room. We're going to be starting very shortly with the next segment, Infusing New Life into Green Development. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. We're going to be starting very shortly. I welcome you back after lunch, ladies and gentlemen, and I invite you to take your seats in the Jasmine Room. We're going to be starting with the proceedings on the second half of the event today. And the deliberations in the second segment are themed Infusing New Life into Green Development. May I request you to please be seated? We're going to be starting very shortly. A polite reminder to please keep your mobile phones on silent once again. Thank you very much. Thank you for your cooperation, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Please take seats so that we can begin. Thank you very much once again, ladies and gentlemen. May I request you and invite you to take your seats in the Jasmine Room. We are now going to be starting deliberations on infusing new life into green development, life as in lifestyle for environment. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen at the back, may I request you to please be seated. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, namaskar once again, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Indian G20 Sherpa Shri Amitabh Kant, I welcome you today to this special event on infusing new life into green development. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is associated with the first development working group meeting under India's G20 presidency. Once again, I extend my heartiest greetings and namaste to the honorable dignitaries, G20 delegates, eminent speakers, esteemed guests, friends from the media, as also the students who are gracing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, India's G20 presidency celebrates India's civilizational ethos, drawing inspiration from the Sanskrit saying, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which translates to, the world is one family. This resonates strongly in India's G20 theme of one earth, one family, one future. India's mission LiFE, Lifestyle for Environment, launched by the Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi this October, aims at charting a pathway for people worldwide to strive towards achieving the 2030 agenda. The Development Working Group envisages an ambitious outcome on LiFE in the coming months, and we are looking forward, ladies and gentlemen, to hear the perspectives of the erudite luminaries in our midst, the stellar array of global experts during the conversations today. We now have an audio-visual on Mission LiFE to give you more insight into this ambitious vision for global action. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention on this screen? Let's take a look at this audio-visual. So we're going to be playing a special audio visual for you, ladies and gentlemen, but we're just waiting for you to take your seats at the back. Thank you very much. Please be seated. We have a very special audio visual on Mission LiFE, LiFE, which is Lifestyle for Environment. This is the session on infusing new life into green development. And this particular video will delve more and give you more perspective and insight into this ambitious vision for global action. Let's take a look at the audio visual now.
From everyone that the world is changing. See, you sound warm. That's how I know that the change is not for the better. But how did we get here? I also want the world to change, but I want it to change for the better. In 2030, I will be 21. Millions like me will be stepping into an age of hope and optimism. Shouldn't the world match our dreams, our potential? 2030, isn't that the year by where the world committed itself to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals? That's 2,000 days from now. Can we do something together? I think we can. I know we can. When I look around, I see we are already doing a few things right. Maybe only a few among us are doing it. Maybe we're only a little, but that's how life starts. Like, do you know where I heard it first?
Yes, life. Life.
If you want, find every single person, for communities, for organizations, for policymakers, for governments, for nations. And how does this movement of life start? With just 5 steps. First step, what are it's always steps. Second step, take a step, okay? That's not okay. Third, make a choice about where we get our energy from and ignore that we have more choices.
Society में
कुछ चीजें कॉमन विषय हैं जैसे वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग एंड सोलर पैनल
पहले कस्टमर आते थे ब्रांड के लिए प्राइस के लिए हमारे के लिए अब कस्टमर आते हैं हमारे पास फाइट का रेटिंग के लिए के लिए
आजकल ज्यादातर ई बाइक यूज करनी होती है अच्छा लगता है
The first step, simple. Just switch on light. Just switch off. And the fifth step, spread the word to spread the movement. My country has renewed its commitment to the planet. And it should go beyond words and act. It's time for the world to join us. Act for life.
Ladies and gentlemen, India has given a global call to action with Mission LiFE. And I now take the privilege of inviting the Indian G20 Sherpa, Shri Amitabh Kant, who is going to be in conversation with Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Let's welcome them both on stage with a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Shri Amitabh Kant and Dr. Arunabha Ghosh on stage. Namaskar and welcome, sir. I now request you, Dr. Ghosh, to please take over the proceedings.
Yes. Good afternoon and welcome back after the lunch. And since this session is about infusing new life into green development, no one better than India's G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to tell us a little bit more about what Mission LiFE means for G20. Mr. Kant, the G20 is about creating consensus, bringing economies together, bridging divides to solve global crises. Where does sustainable lifestyle and Mission LiFE fit in driving a new deal for green development across the world?
So thanks. Let me first welcome all our guests here today. It's wonderful to have all of them from different parts of the world joining us for this session on life. And life is critical because, a country like India, for instance, we will be doing urbanization on a very rapid pace in the coming years. In the next 5 decades, you'll see 500 million Indians getting into the process of urbanization. That's like building 2 Americas. Every 3 years, you'll be doing a completely new Chicago, for instance. Now, you cannot follow the model of urbanization which the Western world has done. When America urbanized, gas, water, everything was freely available. And therefore, America had the luxury of creating sprawling cities. You could build cities for cars and not for people. So the American car companies actually bought over the railway companies and destroyed them so that cars could sell. The American model was to build urbanization across its highways. And the challenge now for a country like India and many developing countries of the world is to do a model which is totally different. And that is that you do compact, dense urbanization. And that would mean that you create cities for walking, for cycling, for renewable energy, for electric mobility, a totally different model of, so this would require a totally different kind of a growth model. This would require a different, you will have to actually train your urban planners for another pattern of urbanization, which Indian planners are not equipped to. They've all been trained in the American model of urbanization. You will have to bring in a lot of behavioral change. And when you talk about lifestyle for sustainability, it's actually a lot to do with nudging behavior. And nudging behavior is what Richard Thaler and Carl Sunstein talk about, that it's not countries which will make a difference. It's individual and community behavior which will make a difference. If countries were to make a difference, a lot of difference would have been made from the time of COP1 to COP27. So if you look back at looking at the history of COP1 to COP27, not one single commitment of the developed world has been lived up to. And every year you'll find new commitments, as you've seen a new commitment on loss and damages in COP27, and all of them will be long-term commitments which will not be fulfilled. So if you want a transformation on much of this, what has been discussed will be relating to individual action and community behavioral change. And that will be really the key to future growth.
So you've talked about nudge, you've talked about individual behavior, but you also talked about the developing world, the emerging economies. So how does this individual behavior aggregate at a national, at an economy-wide level, whether it's renewables, whether it's green hydrogen? Could you reflect a little bit about how India is thinking about this movement at a national level?
So, if you look at the overall carbon space available to the world at 1.5 degrees centigrade, 2,400 gigatons, let's look at a country like India, specifically. We have not contributed to carbonizing the world. Our contribution is 1.5% per capita wise. You're entitled to about close to 18%. We've not contributed to it, but irrespective of that, we are going to industrialize, and therefore the challenge for India is to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. Now, if you want to industrialize without carbonizing the world, renewable is one component, because electricity is just 20% of your energy. So even if you do 100% of your electricity, it'll be just 20% of your energy. The balance is 80% is all hard to abate sectors. It's refineries, it's fertilizer, it's steel, it's cement, it's long distance transport. And the challenge, as I see it, is that you need to decarbonize hard to abate sectors. And that would mean that you need to use renewable, to crack water, use electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen and decarbonize these sectors. Now, India, for instance, is climatically blessed. India doesn't have competition in that field from China. Your competition, if there is any, is from Middle East in terms of climatic condition. And you are already a consumer of gray hydrogen of about 11%. So if you are able to decarbonize your refineries, your steel, your cement, the potential for India to be the production center of the world, the export center of the world, the technology center of the world, the R&D center of the world, the electrolyzer manufacturing of the world is huge. And what it would lead to is then a completely new model of development. That is a model of development which is focused on renewable, which is focused on green hydrogen, and which is focused on electric mobility. And that, it's very important to say that LiFE is not about being anti-consumerism. It's about a completely new model of development which involves a behavioral change towards completely new areas of growth, new urbanization, new transportation, new circular economy, a new method of actually moving forward to decarbonize your fossil growth sectors. The Prime Minister has already said in his Independence Day address that India should be independent from fossil fuel import by 2047, by the time it becomes 100. You're already doing about $200 billion worth of fossil fuel import. This is going to go up to about $350 billion in the next 15 years. Now, India will not have the capacity to do that unless and until it doesn't use its hugely blessed climatic condition to become a massive producer of green hydrogen.
You talked about India and other emerging countries being fast urbanizing economies. These are also countries that have very young populations.
Yeah.
What is this new model of development that the youth could both aspire to but also drive? Can we create a circular economy unicorn in India?
Well, you can, but circular economy is a it's a complex process. I mean, circular economy can be done if you do this process of R&D, where every input is actually an output into something else. Circular economy, you can't retrofit. You need to do a lot of innovation from the design stage itself. For every startup to say that I'm going to become a circular economy startup means that everything you produce is designed as an input into something else. And therefore, the backward forward linkages into manufacturing process has to be very, very tightly thought through. A lot of research, a lot of development, a lot of innovation has to go in. And therefore, while India's emerged as a great startup nation in the world, a huge amount of work has to be done by young entrepreneurs. A lot of disruption has to be done in many of these fields in the circular economy. Trying to say that I want to be a circular economy nation by retrofitting is a very difficult job. It requires huge amount of R&D and innovation.
Last question, Mr. Khan. This side event, of course, is happening on the sidelines of what is going to be the first meeting of the Development Working Group. So what would be your message to other delegates from the G20 countries of how Mission LiFE can also drive a new agenda for the Development Working Group?
So one is that governments across the world, and their track record has been extremely poor. They will give long-term commitments they will never fulfill. If you want to transform the world in terms of a net zero world by 2050, individuals and communities will have to take a lot of responsibility. And that would mean that a completely new model of growth, a completely new model of development has to emerge from the emerging nations in terms of transportation, in terms of urbanization, in terms of plastics, in terms of circular economy. That is really the key, that the developing economies must become the nations to industrialize without carbonizing.
We will deliberate through the afternoon how exactly we can do that, so we can provide those inputs into your discussions with the G20 Development Working Group. Thank you, Mr. Kant, for kicking us off on sustainable lifestyle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shrikant, for inspiring us and actually encouraging us to step up and become champions of Mission Life. Also, this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, sets the context for the discussions ahead. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for leading the conversation. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have a special message for India's G20 presidency. Also, the G20 delegates who will drive these important discussions over the coming months, and the people of India from Her Majesty Queen of Bhutan, Jetsun Pema Wangchuk. Let's take a look at that video message.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings and best wishes from His Majesty the King and the people of Bhutan. Our congratulations to India on assuming the presidency of the G20. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, we are confident that India will discharge its important responsibilities of the presidency with great prudence and success. We extend our best wishes to Prime Minister Modi and the Government of India. It is a privilege to address this side event of the Development Working Group on infusing new life into green development. We commend and support the launch of Mission Life by Prime Minister Modi, which closely echoes Bhutan's long-standing commitment to sustainability and environmental preservation. Along with India, we are dedicated to addressing one of the most complex and significant challenges of our time, climate change. As scientists continue to reveal alarming rates of global warming in a world stretched thin for resources, Bhutan became the world's first carbon-negative country, with our forests absorbing about 3 times more carbon dioxide emissions than we emit. And we have pledged to remain a net carbon sink for all times to come. In framing an approach to holistic development and progress, the people of Bhutan have nurtured a deep-rooted reverence for our natural environment. Today, Bhutan's development philosophy centers around the principle of environmental protection and sustainable socio-economic development. But if changing realities bring new ambitions and goals, it must also bring new plans and preparations. Bhutan is committed to ensuring the survival and continued vibrance of our natural heritage. We are aware that this will require concerted efforts in order to balance cultural and environmental conservation with economic prosperity. 2 months ago, in October, Bhutan held the inaugural snowman race. The race was initiated by His Majesty the King to bring global attention to climate change and its devastating consequences. Known as the world's toughest climate action race, top runners from across the world journeyed over some of the last untouched landscapes of Bhutan's mountain ranges. People living in these remote communities have contributed the least to climate change, and yet are the most vulnerable to its consequences. Our glaciers, which are water reserves sustaining over 1 billion lives, are disappearing and are at constant risk of flooding. The snowman race ended with the climate conclave to consolidate our commitment and chart the way forward. Bhutan has also scaled up our conservation efforts with the launch of programs such as the Bhutan for Life flagship project that creates sustainable financing, the first of its kind in Asia, to permanently safeguard Bhutan's network of protected areas. The positive impacts of the project goes well beyond Bhutan, with the protection of endangered flora and fauna species, as well as the conservation of critical watersheds and forests. A huge step to finding solutions to global problems like climate change and averting future crises will be taken if we can think in the spirit of community and identify individual actions that can make a difference. We are aware that climate change is the most significant threat facing youth and children across the world. Save the Children estimates that by 2040, 1 in 4 children will be living in areas with extreme water shortages as a result of the climate crisis, while currently 160 million children are exposed to increasingly severe and prolonged droughts. We have a duty to ensure that our children inherit a livable planet. It is integral that we always remain mindful of how our decisions and actions today impact the well-being of future generations. So I understand this to be the intention of the LiFE campaign, and I take this opportunity to thank the Government of India and UNEP India office for amplifying this initiative globally. We stand with our neighbor and close friend India to urge for global action on this front. We have a colossal challenge on our hands, one that no country or company or individual can tackle alone. If each of us does our part, we can put humanity back into harmony with nature and leave for future generations a world of peace, prosperity, equality, and happiness. Thank you and tashdale.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank Her Majesty, the Queen of Bhutan, Jetsun Pema Wangchuk, for her message of solidarity and cooperation as well as peace. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I take the privilege of once again inviting the Indian G20 Sherpa, Shri Amitabh Kant, on stage, this time for a group photographs with all our speakers. May I invite Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA, Dr. Atsushi Watabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies, Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair, the Energy and Resources Institute, and from our Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, UN, Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, Times Network, Ms. Ligia Norona, UN Assistant Secretary General and Head of UNEP New York Office, Dr. Aruna Baghosh. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite Mr. Stephen Sikars, Director, Division of Circular Economy and Environmental Protection, UNIDO, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, Innovator and Education Reformist, Dr. Shannon B. Olson, Global Director, the ECO Network. We have Dr. Shannon B. Olson, Global Director from the ECO Network. I invite you all to please grace the stage for a group photograph. I may also invite the DWG co-chairs to join us on stage, please. May I invite Shri Naidu and Ms. Gambhir to please grace the stage, ladies and gentlemen. Can we have a big round of applause for the dignitaries gracing the dais? Thank you so much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apprise you that the United Nations has been a champion of Mission Life with Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres gracing the launch of LiFE. Today, we have a message from the UN Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, on this special occasion. We'll take a look at that audio visual, please.
Excellencies, my warm congratulations.
Excellencies, I warmly congratulate India for assuming the presidency of the G20 and thank the Development Working Group meeting for convening today's event on infusing new life into green development. The Lifestyle for the Environment, or LiFE movement, is a welcomed reminder that both individuals and collectives have a role to play in tackling our shared challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, poverty, hunger, social unrest and inequalities, and the climate emergency are all on the rise. These crises are not only pushing us further away from the Sustainable Development Goals as we reach the halfway mark to 2030, but also undermining our collective ability to withstand future crises. As the UN Secretary General reiterated at the recently concluded COP27, we need all hands on deck. And we need India's leadership in this pivotal historic moment to keep the G20 together and fulfill its promise of delivering a more stable and equal world for all. The world needs an SDG stimulus plan to bring our Sustainable Development Goals back on track by mobilizing and accelerating long-term, low-interest, sustainable financing in support of a just transition for all. Driven by the leadership of India, we hope to see the G20 take concrete actions to implement such a plan. The UN will remain fully committed to pursuing this effort, including through the work of the UNDP as Secretariat of the Sustainable Finance Working Group. Under India's G20 presidency, which marks the first ever developing country troika ahead of Brazil and South Africa's presidencies, we look forward to greater engagement from the Development Working Group in upcoming meetings, including the SDG Summit and the high-level dialogue on financing planned for 2023. Excellencies, the time has come to infuse new life into green development. The United Nations stands ready to support India's G20 presidency to this end, and through this, see the G20's collective actions on sustainable development rise to new heights. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time indeed has come to infuse new life into the Sustainable Development Goals. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to inform all of you that we have Shri Parmeshwaran Iyer, the CEO of DPIO, who's going to be joining us live from New Delhi. And he has a presentation on Mission Life. Also, he's going to talk about how India envisages rolling out this ambitious mission for millions of people across the world. Mr. Iyer, if you can hear us, ladies and gentlemen, let's connect with Shri Parmeshwaran Iyer.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you in Mumbai. I'm sorry I couldn't be there today due to another pressing engagement in Delhi, but very happy to talk to you about life. I've already heard from Amitabh and Arunabha about sort of big picture on life. I'm going to give you share a presentation in which we talk about how Mission Life is proposed to be rolled out both nationally as well as internationally. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. So hopefully you can see the screen. So as Amitabh said, again, this is a people's movement. And in Hindi, we refer to that as a Jan Andolan. It's essentially how individuals and communities act, sort of walk the talk on promoting a sort of climate-friendly and environmentally conscious life. So let me, why do I go to the next? Okay, here we go. So this presentation is very brief, but 4 parts to it. So what is Mission Life? You saw the opening video in the beginning. That was the video launched by the Prime Minister and the UN Secretary General on the 20th of October in Gujarat. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about life in India, life globally, and then life in G20 to be more specific. Now, as all of you know, at COP26, Prime Minister Modi, first referred to lifestyle for the environment. And, this was the first time where a head of government had actually spoken about this at an international forum and given quite a sort of, and spoke about the sort of key elements of life. And so that's when we first heard about it in November 2021. Now, how can these individual behaviors, we heard talking about it's time for people to take action, right? We can't wait for the developed world and all the conversations which are going on, while that will go on in parallel on climate change and how do you address it, it's time to take action at scale. So this is how individuals can actually impact climate change in a positive manner. So some very specific examples. Water, on average, we all waste more than 2.5 liters of water daily. Electricity, what all of us can do individually in terms of turning lights, air conditioners, heaters were not in use. You can save up to 282 kilowatts of energy per day. Food, a huge challenge globally. Food wastage, there have been a number of international conferences on this. But what we do know is that on average, people waste about 500 grams of food every single day. Fuel, just 30 minutes of red light idling wastes nearly 1 liter of fuel. So all of us can make contributions to protect the climate and the environment. And therefore, if you look at these actions we have chosen, they deal both with mitigation in terms of reducing emissions, but also in terms of adaptation. If we have water scarcity, how can people adapt to water scarcity? So it cuts across both the mitigation and adaptation discussion. Now, again, just to bring it back to why life, without sort of belaboring the point, obviously climate change is very real, the threat, and it's up to all of us. Everyone has a stake in it, and we all need to act. Therefore, when we talk of sustainable lifestyles, Amitabh spoke about urbanization, the circular economy. Again, what can individuals, families, and communities do during this momentous transitions which are taking place nationally and globally? So in terms of pro-climate lifestyle behavior, this can actually help the planet slash 40 to 70% reduction in GHG emissions by 2050. So this is an IPCC statistic. There's another UNEP statistic which says that individual behaviors can actually reduce emissions by up to 20%. And then, of course, as we discussed, LiFE will also help to strengthen adaptation strategies at an individual and community level. So what is LiFE? We've spoken about LiFE as a movement. So LiFE, like many other programs in India, which Prime Minister Modi has been championing for the last 8 years in mission mode, LiFE is another one of those at-scale mission mode programs. Again, India-led global movement, but nationally to be rolled out, which brings individual and community behavior at the heart and center of climate action. So that's very, very important. Repeating the point about how individuals and communities can practice pro-planet people behavior. And this is being rolled out nationally now. And again, we are at NITI, we are working very closely with the Ministry of Forest, Environment and Climate Change together to roll this program out across India and again, ambitiously across the world. Now, again, clearly directly linked to SDG 12 and many other SDGs. As you know, SDG 12 talks about responsible production and consumption. The Prime Minister, when he introduced LiFE to the world at COP26 at Glasgow, spoke about mindful consumption and production. And so, again, this is at the heart of the SDG program. And of course, as you know, India has included LiFE as a part of its updated nationally determined contributions. So LiFE, I think we perhaps are the first country which has brought LiFE into its NDCs. Let's talk a little bit about how this is to be rolled out. As you saw, this is just a picture of Prime Minister Modi, the Secretary General of the UN, in launching Mission LiFE globally on the 20th of October. We were fortunate to have 10 countries, the heads of government and heads of state, endorsing the program at that point through recorded video messages. So again, that's a step towards making LiFE a global movement. Now, what are the key elements of life? And I think Arunabha and Amitabh referred to this, but it's a very ambitious agenda. 1 billion people in India to take individual and collective action over the next 5 to 6 years. So this is being rolled out across the country in our federal systems, the state governments, the local governments, the communities, they're all working on life. So there's accountability at every level. But if you look at how it's supposed to trigger, initially it's about nudging people into life, climate and environmentally friendly behavior. That will in turn change demand. It will trigger demand for more life-friendly supply. So that demand is going to trigger supply in a climate-friendly and environmentally friendly manner. So production will be tailored to demand. And then, of course, it's also about changing policies and regulations. A lot of work has gone on already, but much more work to be done in terms of policies related to industry, to local governments, to urbanization. So all these policies are already being worked on. And important to emphasize, this is not sequential. All three elements of life are going on in parallel, so that we don't have to wait to nudge, to change demand, to sort of demand supply. It's all going to go on in parallel. Now, again, there is a list of 75 individual life actions across 7 categories. There is a mission document which has been jointly prepared by Niti Aayog as well as the Ministry of Forest and Environment. Those 7 categories are listed below. Let me just read them out. Energy saved, water saved, single-use plastic reduced, sustainable food systems adopted, waste reduced, healthy lifestyles adopted, and e-waste reduced. So those are the 7 buckets under which there are 75 individual life actions to celebrate the 75th anniversary of India's freedom. But again, these are indicative actions, and there will be many more actions which can be practiced by individuals and communities. But important to emphasize that all life actions need to be specific and measurable, easy to practice by individuals, communities, with minimal supply side dependencies. And I think an important point to emphasize, this is not about reducing consumption. It's just about becoming more responsible, more sustainable consumption, and a more sustainable lifestyle. And therefore, these actions are easy to practice by everyone, and all of them will lead to sort of pro-planet people impacts. And also they will promote economic activity, as we saw, because demand will trigger supply. And therefore, we will have greater economic activity as a result of life. Now, again, what is the likely impact of Mission Life in India alone? Now, these are calculations undertaken by Niti, by our research team. But just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the impact of life. Now, the calculation is that just switching off a car or scooter engines at traffic lights or railway crossings can save up to 22.5 billion kilowatt hours of energy. Turning off running taps when not in active use can save up to 9 trillion liters of water. That's adaptation for you. Using a cloth bag instead of plastic while shopping can save 375 tons of solid waste, can prevent it from entering the landfill, and discarding non-functioning gadgets by e-recycling can recycle up to 0.75 million tons of e-waste. And composting waste food at home can save up to 15 billion tons of food and prevent that from also going to landfill. So clearly a massive impact, just if you take these numbers, and there will be much more than this, which we need to calculate. And globally, the impact would be, much more than this. Let's talk a little bit about Mission Life Global. We've had some very good interactions with our development partners. I can see many of them are sitting there with you in the conference room. So development partners, UN agencies, civil society, international partners, international governments. And so now the idea is, how can Mission Life, in addition to being scaled up in India, go global? Because again, this is a kind of India-led, South-led global movement to promote climate-friendly actions. So we've had a number of discussions, a number of stakeholder meetings. We're going to take this forward even more, but critical to get stakeholders across the globe to integrate life in their activities as well. A lot of it is going on already. many countries around the world are already practicing LiFE type actions at an individual, community, institutional level. But we are talking of scale, national scale in India, and then global scale. So how do we do that? So again, there's been an endorsement by these 10 countries I mentioned on October 20th. So of course, there will be key stakeholders we are engaging with, but all the other countries as well. But more importantly, individuals in other countries. I'll come to that in the next slide. There's also a proposal from India. We're working with the Ministry of External Affairs on proposing a UN International LiFE Day, the way it was done for yoga. And so this proposal is being mooted, and we'll be working in collaboration with and all the other countries to take this forward. The Prime Minister on June 5th of this year also launched a call for proposals. So ideas and research proposals have been invited from global universities and research institutes, precisely on this topic of how individuals can adopt climate-friendly actions in a measurable and attributable manner. So this call for action is still open in case any of you would like to apply, or institutions which would respond to this. The deadline is 31st December. So we still have another couple of weeks when proposals are coming in from all over the world, including from India. And we would encourage you to get your friends, colleagues, and partners to apply. So these will then be vetted. We'll select the top proposals. And then on June 5th, 2023, again, World Environment Day, we'll be having an international conference in India where we will be honoring the winners of these proposals and also giving them an award, which I've got to give Amitabh credit for. He was my predecessor in NITI. So he has instituted an award of $25,000, I believe, for the best papers. So we look forward to receiving proposals from all of you. Now, let me come to the last part of the presentation, which is Mission LiFE and G20. How can LiFE be actually integrated and mainstream into the working groups, into the conversation, and finally into the communique? So we have a few ideas on that. Hopefully you can deliberate upon them in the afternoon session and beyond. So again, I think one thing I would like to re-emphasize, something which Amitabh had mentioned earlier. This is all about walking the talk on climate action. While all the discussions are going on globally, this is how India is actually going to deliver on the ground. This is something with Prime Minister Modi, this is where he has led the world in terms of delivering services, basic services at scale. And therefore, it's all about the action. So LiFE is already underway in terms of getting implemented. So I think this is an important point to stress in all your deliberations. How can people, communities, and institutions walk the talk on sustainable lifestyles, each one from their perspective? So I think that's an important point we wanted to emphasize for the G20 conversation. Again, as I mentioned, how can some of the key principles of LiFE get embedded across all the working groups? And then again, bringing together development and climate, something which Arunabha spoke about, green development. How can we integrate these two agendas, development and climate, which are actually very closely interlinked, by nudging people to adopt sustainable lifestyles? So we wanted to make that point as well. Again, with our multilateral partners, that's again one of the important agendas of the finance track, the reform of the multilateral agencies. I think it's critical now to make sure that LiFE and LiFE-related programs are embedded in their work programs. So again, that's an important point. Hopefully will be taken up in the finance group, but potentially in the Sherpa track as well. And then we are expecting and hoping that there would be some mention of LiFE in the final communique. And that text, we are working closely with Amitabh and his team on that. But again, it needs to get embedded across the board so that it's really reflected in the action plans and implementation plans coming out of the working group. So, we are very confident and hopeful that LiFE as a concept, as a program, as a call to action can get embedded in that final G20 communique. Thank you very much. I was supposed to take a couple of questions, but maybe if there are, I can do one. I have another meeting in a few minutes, but very happy to join you. Thanks once again for the opportunity. Thanks to Amitabh and Arunabha in particular. Thank you. Hi, Arunabha, I can't hear you.
Mr. Iyer?
Yeah, I'm good.
Great. Thank you so much for a very clear presentation. We will take maybe a couple of questions, but I had one for you. India has received support from many countries, as you talked about in your presentation on Mission Life. But, lifestyles ultimately, Mr. Iyer, is a very deeply personal matter. How do you envision, in addition to the way the mission has been designed, galvanizing that individual action into something that aggregates at an economy-wide level?
Look, it's a great question, Arunabha. We've been discussing this for a while. I think we have to learn the lessons of other behavioral, linked programs, because as you know, life, as was mentioned earlier by you and Amitabh, is all about behavior change. A lot of climate-friendly lifestyle is already practiced traditionally in India. We need to learn from that. But if you have to take it to scale, you have to program for scale. So like in the Swachh Bharat mission, every village in India became accountable for making its village open defecation free. But they needed to be triggered into that behavior change. So I think the key elements, they've got to be incentivized, and they need to understand and how changing their behavior and making it more climate and environment friendly is actually could lead to economic returns. So for example, we had Cass Sunstein coming in here and marveling at nudge at scale in the Swachh Bharat mission. People stopped defecating in the open and came and started using toilets. Similarly, I think it will be critical to use some of those techniques and to incentivize individuals and communities into taking action towards climate-friendly behavior, which potentially can have an economic return for the community. So for example, in a Swachh Bharat ODF, open defecation free village, UNICEF calculated that each household would save up to 50,000 rupees on account of avoided medical fees, real estate value, time saved. So I think that we need to do some of that economic analysis, and we need to promote life as not just good for the environment, good for the climate, the planet, but actually good for households and good for the economy.
Indeed, and no one better than you to know about how to take it to scale, especially through the Swachh Bharat mission. Maybe we have time for one question. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to pose a question to Mr. Iyer, either about what we're doing in India or how this goes across to the rest of the world. Yes, yes, sir. If we could just get a microphone out to you. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation on life. I'm Kamal Kumar Murari. I am a faculty in Tata Institute of Social Science. And since I'm connected to academics, the point that you have actually made in your presentation were really good. My question is, in what way those principles of life can be embedded in our schooling as well as college education?
All right, thank you. And I see one question here up front. Yes, sir. And then we'll get back to Mr. Iyer.
Great presentation, Mr. Iyer. I'm Anil Chaudhary. I run the Access to Information or Aspire to Innovate program in the Government of Bangladesh from ICT Ministry and Cabinet Division, supported by UNDP. I just wanted to, this is brilliant in terms of what you have aspired or conceptualized for behavioral nudge. But do you see that in parallel to that, infrastructure development and state-wise adoption of convenience for this behavioral nudge has to be also put forward, and also corporate incentives for such adoption in corporations, not in individuals? Just wanted to see if combination of incentives for corporations and infrastructure development for individuals, whether they would be included in the life program.
I hope you could hear that, Mr. Iyer. One question on education and one question on incentives for businesses.
Yeah, no, I got both. I think both are excellent questions. And in fact, on the school front, there's no question that school kids are the best ambassadors for such radical behavior change programs at scale. And therefore, we've already been in touch with the Secretary of the Department of School Education. It is being put into the curriculum, and I think that will lead to a huge shift in behavior. So it's a great suggestion. It's already being done, but I think we need to do more. And the best ambassadors, as I said, for any kind of behavior change are the kids. They pick it up quickly, they understand it, and they influence everyone, including their parents. On the incentives for industry or for the corporate sector, in my presentation, I'd already mentioned that a change in behavior is going to trigger a supply response. And therefore, the incentives for industry are already there. It's also part of the policy agenda related to LiFE. So there will need to be economic incentives, but I think the market itself will become the growing of the market for sustainable lifestyle related products will open up the market even more for the corporate sector to come in. So that I think will itself be an economic incentive, but certainly we will also need to, discuss with industry, get their views. There are many global programs. There's the 50-liter program, which is looking at, using just 50 liters. So a large agenda in terms of the incentives to the corporate sector, but we're working on that. And, this will become clearer as we go along. As I said, it's not sequential. It all goes on in parallel.
Mr. Iyer, we really missed having you here in person, but thank you for articulating a very clear plan for the mission, both in India and globally. And all we can say as we say goodbye to you is, may you keep infusing life into life. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Arunabha. See you soon.
See you soon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh, once again. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we will now start with the first fireside conversation on boosting the SDGs with LiFE. I am pleased to call on stage our moderator for today's fireside, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Let's welcome her on stage with a big round of applause. We have our esteemed speakers gracing the stage, Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA. Let's welcome the lady with a big round of applause, please. Welcome, ma'am. May I invite Dr. Atsushi Watanabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies. Let's welcome him on stage with a round of applause. Welcome, sir. May I invite Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair, Terry, and former Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations. Let's welcome him on stage with a big round of applause. Welcome, sir. Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research. There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome him on stage. Welcome, sir. With that, Ms. Inamdar, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Now you can hear me. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with this distinguished panel of speakers. Very often in the course of my coverage as a journalist, we hear the term sustainable development. It's become everyone's favorite buzzword. It's wheeled out at all corporate announcements. Companies love to talk about their net zero emissions and their goals and how environmental friendly they're going to be. It's what governments like to talk about as well. What I found very interesting about the concept of Mission LiFE, lifestyle for environment, is that it has a clear set of action points. There's a roadmap. And what we aim to do in session 1 is the how of it. How does it actually translate into real change? So with that, let me begin with Ms. Gauri. Ms. Gauri, I just want to add before I start, has been at the starting point of India's solar mission. One which is now recognized globally as being the cheapest, most efficient, and fastest growing. So there we have someone who's actually worked in turning a concept into reality. Let me begin, ma'am, by getting your thoughts on how Mission LiFE can be translated into the real world.
Thanks, Tamanna, and really great to be here. And, great to be talking to such a distinguished audience. I think that potentially the whole concept of Mission LiFE to me looks like a fantastic way of breaking down the silos in which we think. So it's about really, and I'll give you a specific example from the world, the sector that I deal with. But it's gives you a very clear pathway of thinking very differently, of to use the very often used cliche of thinking in a different paradigm. But if I had to talk about renewable energy, then to me it's about not thinking of renewable energy in a supply kind of a sense and energy efficiency in a different silo. But it's about how you can really talk about them together to look at outcomes that you want to deliver on the ground very differently from how you would do it if you were thinking of creating the policy frameworks separately for the two. So that I think is something that really strikes me about Mission Life. And secondly, and I think we've heard a lot about it, it's about unleashing the power of the collectives. Right. And so the policy frameworks as they are designed today, and I'm talking not just about in India or in many other countries, they still are very supply driven. So it's about saying that this is the outcome we want, but it's not about creating the platform where you can actually engage and bring communities and really unleash the power that the communities can bring. And I'll give you a quick example. I was talking to the German regulator very recently, and you know about the crisis that Europe's having. And he told me, it's how much do you think is the elasticity of demand for the industry sector in Germany? And I thought, industry in Germany is probably one of the most efficient. Right. So you're really looking at maybe 5 or 6%. And since he was asking about it, so I said, okay, 8%. And he said, the industries completely took us unaware because our demand actually went down by 20%. So it's really about allowing people to be a partner in the whole space. So creating that policy space for partnerships to evolve rather than supply-driven ways of doing action. And I'll give you a very quick example again of something, because I've served a lot in Madhya Pradesh. So Indore, which is the cleanest city, we didn't think that, getting the household to look at bio waste and other waste differently and segregating it at the household is possible. But it's been shown in Indore that it's possible, and it's because you allowed space for the community to participate in it's a large vision.
The people take pride in it.
Absolutely.
People from Indore will say, I'm from the cleanest city.
Exactly. So it's about making that switch and giving, the policy becomes like a platform to engage with communities as partners, rather than, saying that this is what you need to do.
Okay. So now the question is how. We took the example of solar energy. I don't know. Can you hear me if I'm this side? Yeah. Mr. Nitin Desai, you wrote the book on climate policy, didn't you?
No, he wrote.
No, he wrote the book, but you've been doing this for a long, long time. You've seen India's transformation journey, and we're sitting now here at a point where we're hoping Mission Life becomes a mass movement that India can lead globally as well. A lot of the 75 points of Mission Life hark back to traditions, to Indian traditions, using the kulhar, for example, instead of teacups, etc. How imperative do you think it is to marry this idea with what people already naturally do, and how can that be taken forward?
Let me just say this, that in many ways, what the list of 75 that I've seen is interesting. There are just a couple of things that I would stress. One, you cannot address the issue of making consumption sustainable unless you also address the issue of the inequality of income. If I look at our country, the top 10% of the people account for the bulk of the emissions that we have to cope with. The middle 40% is more or less on average, and the poorest 50% are way below the normal. In fact, you should accept that their consumption will go up, their emissions will go up, because otherwise they will not get out of poverty. So we need a policy which nudges those whose consumption is way above the average initially. That is what we should do. Second, I think we should increasingly focus also on the side benefits which arise from, say, you ask people to do things to reduce carbon emissions, but it will also have positive things on air quality, positive things on health. And in many ways, that will persuade people a little more quickly, because that's immediate. It's not long-term in nature. And that will persuade people immediately to get into that. And the third thing is, how do I get the commercial system to start paying more attention? And this is where we have to start looking at the way credit systems which really direct the direction of investment function. And this is the area where new thing which has come out is blended finance, where concessional finance given by governments or philanthropic societies can be used to leverage commercial capital in the right direction. So I would say that if you have to start looking for things, do not forget, you must pay serious attention initially to the people who are consuming well above the national average. And incidentally, globally also the same thing should apply, but we'll probably go into that a little later. And second, start focusing as much attention on the immediate benefits that will come from such behavior, and not just on the long-term benefit because of carbon emission reductions.
I want to actually take that thought further. So being environmentally friendly is seen as a penalty you must pay for a greener environment. You're talking about the top 10% making those cuts, instead of asking those who haven't gotten to that point to pollute enough. The concept of LiFE, though, and let me just go to Mr. Dibash on this, talks about not dampening down economic activity. Developing nations, and not just India, don't want to hold back consumption. We need consumption to increase. I mean, we are a consumption-driven economy. How do you ensure that sustainability does not become a sacrifice?
Thank you, and I'm really pleased to be part of this panel. I think a good place to pick up the conversation is where our colleague from IRENA started, which is to say that our orientation has been far too much on the supply side. And if you look at the demand side, then the question becomes, and this speaks to Mr. Desai's point about equity and aspiration and being able to actually achieve decent living. People don't want energy. They want the services that energy brings them, right? They don't want a car, or sometimes they do want a car, but it's about the mobility services. It's about the cooling services and so on and so forth. It's about the cooking services. So if we focus on the demand side, then the focus is on how to provide those services rather than how to provide the energy that leads to those services. So if you can have more services per unit energy, then you both allow for people to have, in a sense, more consumption of services while treading lighter on the earth, right? So it's that shift in mindset that I think that's really important. And that's the core of the demand side agenda. Now, I will just say this, that shifts in individual behavior, which is one of the core ideas behind LiFE, is essential to this change in demand. Behavioral change is essential to it, but it's not the only part of it. So to bring about a shift in demand, a demand perspective, you need individual change, but you also need the infrastructures to change. You also need the policies to change to support it. So, for example, transport is a great example. So some estimates from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say that you can save about 2 tons of carbon per person per year with a shift to public transport and electric vehicles, right? But if you're going to ask people to take public transport, then you need to have clean, efficient, timely public transport available. We have to be willing to invest in that. So I think these things go hand in hand. And I think if we think in that way, with the orientation about how do you provide the service rather than how do you provide the energy, That's what allows us to both ramp up lifestyles as well as do it in a way that's much lighter on the earth.
I suppose the question is, where is the incentive? Where is the incentive, for example, for rural populations to change their habits? And Dr. Watabe, this is something that you study very, very closely. What would incentivize people who are still aspiring for more to then think about what is the impact of my choices on the environment?
Well, thank you. My answer may not be direct to your question, but well, as Dr. Dubas took up the mobility service as an example, I will continue this discussion. Well, what we do in the cities or communities, rural communities, about decarbonizing lifestyle is first identify 50 or 60 options of behaviors which people can reduce their carbon footprint, including the reduction of private vehicle use and using more public transportation or bicycling. However, particularly for the rural population, it's really very difficult to reduce private car use because even in countries like Japan, the public transportation service is already cut down because of depopulation, shrinking economy, and so on. So in this context, if we tell rural people, please stop using private car from today, no one listens to us because they need to take their kids to school, they need to take their parents to hospitals. And there's no not know that they're reduced public transportation. But if we start talk about, can you still depend on private vehicle driving when you become older and no one in the society can drive alone? Then people are more keen on discussing what kind of alternative mobility system they need for the society for keep their essential services. And that's their entry point for aligning people as the partner for creating alternative demand systems instead of asking individual behavior changes.
So in the context of LiFE, Dr. Watabe, and that's a follow-up for you, you've seen some of the points that India has put out as examples of things that can be done on an individual level. What would be the parallel in Japan, for example, that culturally fits into ways that can preserve the environment, that are eco-friendly, and also lead to sustainable development? What would be those parallels?
Well, in the context of Japan, we are facing a lot of challenges because of the aging, for example, or shrinking population and the devastation of the rural infrastructure. So in our society, the one clear entry point is how we can keep their services or renew their infrastructure that is more resilient to the climate-related disasters, which we are facing more and more in recent years. So that's how we can achieve the both adaptation and mitigation, and also preventing the poverty, which is expected in the near future of our society.
Okay. Ms. Singh, let's come back to the basic point of incentivizing people to change. And let's take it from the point of view of renewable energy. For example, people will move if it's cheaper. It's a better quality service, there's less interruption, and at the end of the day, it costs less. So now how do you bring that back to an individual choice?
So, interesting question, because, I think that's something that's really, it's pretty much on top of the mind of many policymakers. But if I had to answer your question with an example, then, if you're looking, and, Mr. Amitabh Kant spoke about the increasing urbanization. That's not just a India phenomena, it's a phenomenon most of the emerging economies and developing economies will see. With that will come a whole, set of people, of young people who are professionals, who are upwardly mobile, understand, have an awareness of the issues around climate, but how do you really tap into that kind of how do you actually get them to contribute to the whole concept of making choices that are green and making choices that are probably right? So the first thing, of course, I do want to say that as of today, and for some years, renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy. So it's not about it being more costly, because it is now not just competitive with fossil fuels, but cheaper. But it's about, if there is an urban, upwardly mobile professional who's staying in a rented accommodation in Bombay, and you tell him that, tell him or her that there is, make the right choice. Now, the question that will come up is, look, what are my options? How do I get green energy? I don't own the roof, so how do I get solar and get the green energy? So I think that's where you need to bring in the policy that gets people like this to be able to contribute. So can we think about virtual rooftops that allow a professional like someone living in Bombay without a roof space to be able to buy renewable energy or green power into their, to meet their needs, and to be able to get that kind of a digital certification of, if they move from Bombay to Delhi, can they carry that kind of a thing along? So it's really about thinking very differently about how we do policy now. It's about really changing our mindset into making people who are ready to contribute as partners and giving them the space to be partners.
Mr. Desai, I want to follow up on what you said about equitable responsibility. And I think that's very interesting, because we in India, and I want to extend this to, I'm sure, developing countries, of course, have a large aspirational population. Everyone wants to own more, wants the next new phone. And I'm saying that because one of the 75 points of life is repair your gadget. Don't buy a new one. But we want people to buy new ones as well. So how do you balance that?
See, it's focusing on these differences plays a role. Let me give you an example. I don't know if you'll remember, we had this change in the LPGs.
Yes, give it up.
To give up, and you asked people, nudged people into giving up their rights to subsidize LPG. Yes. And what you focused on was, this will help us to get LPG to poorer people. Yes. That was a focus. That worked. Millions of people gave up on the nudge. There was no compulsion. It was just a nudge, but the nudge worked because they could see the translation of what they were doing into benefits, of an immediate benefit for some people. And you remember that happened. So what I'm saying is, even from the perspective of persuading rich people to, and remember this, I must say this, at global level, about something like 47% of the global carbon emissions come from the top 10%, and most of those top percent live in the rich countries. Practically all of them live in the rich countries. There are a handful in the middle income countries. So I'd say that unless you also connect what we're asking the rich people to do, reduce your consumption, not just make it more carbon friendly, but also reduce the totals, will also mean benefits of this sort for this, that can work. So I would urge that looking, that's small example here. Can I start just changing petrol prices in order to encourage people to use less petrol? Now, what will happen in India is, it will have very little effect on the rich. Very little.
I think you've touched a zone of petrol prices is a huge issue in India. And
I know, but it doesn't have any effect on how much drive. So the middle two-wheeler people will be a little bit. The people who suffer are the poorest 50 who take public transport and have to pay more for their travel. So be careful. Use nudges. Don't forget that you can't you need three economic policies. One for the top 10%, one for the middle 40% and one for the bottom 50%. One single energy policy is not the right answer when it comes to consumption management.
But what is the point of persuasion, Mr. Dubash? Is it that you are appealing to people's morality and conscience? Mr. Desai gave the example of give it up. I did in the first month. I was very excited about it to tell people that I gave it up. But a lot of people might not have. They would have said that, you know, this is something we get as taxpayers from the government. Why should I give it up? So if you're going to hinge your plan on appealing to people's better side, is that going to be enough?
I think that for something like this, and it is meant to be a movement, you can't just have one arrow in your quiver, right? You have to have multiple arrows. So on occasion, where the link to the benefits to the poor is so clear, this kind of moral suasion may work, like the Give It Up campaign. In other cases, like for example, with transportation, it's a question of how you construct what is it that people aspire to, right? So we actually have an interesting example in Delhi, which was actually a salutary lesson in some ways. We had a bus rapid transit system, which in many parts of the world has worked well, but it wasn't actually set up and marketed as something that was part of a modern forward-looking city. And I think that that's the important thing to learn from. So we have the same sort of elites in India, for example, who might travel to London and Paris and feel very modern, pulling out their phone and using their app and jumping on a bus, but wouldn't think of doing it here in India. And so it comes back to partly the infrastructure has to be at a quality where people are willing to do that. And that's not just to attract the rich, it's most important for middle and income and poorer populations who rely on it much more. But to create that image that the way we want to live going forward is a city that is cleaner, that has less pollution, where we have healthful lifestyles, where we walk reasonable distances. And that's what modernity is. Modernity may not be, in fact, each of us in individual bubbles of cars. It's a way in which you change our collective thinking. And that requires a combination of incentive structures, policies, and so on, public investment, behavioral change, education, as somebody said earlier. So this idea of a package of policies around which people's behavior shifts over time, I think is what we have to aspire to.
Yeah.
But quick, one thing which needs to be done, the government must tell us what is the environmental impact of its own spending. Do they? They don't tell us. Do I have any number on what is the government impact of governmental spending? Why cannot they make an assessment and give me a number on what is the carbon impact of their spending? We are doing it increasingly in corporations.
Yes.
Corporations have started giving numbers of the carbon impact of their activities, at least scope 1 activities. They don't really do the total. So why can't the government do that? Why can't the government start using government procurement as a way of pushing this agenda? Just as besides blended finance, government spending also can be used to push the direction of investment in a certain way. So I'd like to see what is the carbon impact of this meeting. I won't get that, will I?
Well, I think we should open up to questions. We have a fantastic panel here, and I'm sure there are, more detailed questions than I can put across. Yes, I can see a hand going up there. Someone can just get them a mic.
Yeah, this is Yusuf. I'm from UNICEF India office, Yusuf Kabir. I think, can you hear me?
If you can be a little louder.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah,
yes.
This is Yusuf Kabir from UNICEF Mumbai office. I think it's a very interesting discussion. Just I would like two submission here. Like who are at the impact of the climate? It's mostly the poorest of the poor, people living in the slums, and also rural population. So since it is a first development working group meeting, it is also advisable that we should also hear from them actually how they see the climate actions. Unfortunately, we should not decide on our own because they are at the ground facing all the climate realities. because the climate justice and inequality is a very important point. And rightly, Professor Desai mentioned about if you want to see the carbon footprint of this particular workshop,
yes.
So we may not be doing the justice.
No,
so one
a fair
suggestion
point.
is that to include those beneficiary stakeholders, youth and children, because ultimately we are doing for the youth and children, their voices should also be heard. And just one last suggestion to the panels, that in India, the Ministry of Panchayati Raj has doing a very interesting program called localization of SDGs, where they are going for clean and green villages. So there is always a lot of opportunity is there to mainstream whatever discussion is happening, because ultimately, as Mr. Iyer also mentioned, and also Professor, both the professors mentioned.
Yusuf, is there a question for someone?
Yeah, the question is that how are you going to include the other stakeholders in the working group and discussion to take this forward?
And who is that question for?
Anyone from the panel can answer. Because I don't see audience anywhere. It's entire audience is.
Where is the rest? Where are the people who have to make the change, and where is their inclusion? Ms. Singh, do you want to take that?
No, I really like the question, because that's exactly the point that I was trying to emphasize, that you have to move from policies that are supply driven to policies that can accommodate and be a response to the kind of demand that's coming. So this distinction of we are the policy makers making policy for a set of beneficiaries who are going to be the passive recipients, that actually, and you know, for me, that's what life is about, because it's moving away from that arrogance of we are the ones who are giving you something or the way of doing something to people who are going to be passive recipients, to actually changing it more in terms of, well, there are no givers or there are no recipients, but partners.
Ma'am, may I just add to that? It's a bit of a catch-22, because if you name any initiative, it comes back to it's the government's job to implement it.
And it will remain so if that's the way we market our policy.
Right.
But if I can give you an example of watershed development, which was all about community trying to take, you know, so there were some enabling features in the policy that allowed them a funding source, that allowed them to think through how they want to develop their village and their, their common lands. And that really involved them to take decisions and do the action on the ground. So, you know, the assumption that people out there don't understand what they want, I think that's the wrong assumption.
Yes, the lady over here. I'll come back to you, sir, but the lady over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Harsha. I'm representing International Institute for CSR and Sustainability. So what y'all are discussing is what we are teaching our students. My question to you is, how do we ensure circular economy? You cannot control consumerism. You cannot ask a person not to eat chips or chocolates or Coke. You can't just do that. You cannot hold a person from buying a new electronic gadget. But how do you ensure that the corporates who are manufacturing it take it back? And what kind of policies can the government implement and execute to give benefits to those corporates who take back even a nail polish bottle? You see, I have lots of them. I don't know what to do. So how do we ensure that these two could be implemented instead of asking consumers like us to stop buying? Thank you.
Fantastic question, Harsha. Do you want to direct it to someone specifically?
For all of you.
Okay. Okay. Navroz Dabash wants to take that. Yes.
Thank you. Great question. I'm sure I'm sorry to jump ahead of my co-panelists here, but as you were speaking, an example came to my mind that I thought might be worth sharing. And again, it speaks to this kind of leverage effect of individual action and clever policy. At some point and I can't remember the exact date, I think in Germany they passed a law that basically said that any shop or supermarket is legally liable to dispose effectively of any waste that is generated on its premises, right? They then basically, using that, various social movements persuaded consumers
to strip off any excess packaging and leave it in the store, right? So that excess packaging became something that the supermarket chain or the company, the retail company was responsible then for disposing, which increased their costs. So they sent the signal backward up the supply chain to their providers, saying, we really need to see much less packaging. So it's a really good way of how individual behavior can drive change up through the supply chain when it's enabled by legislative change. So that kind of sort of jujitsu is what I think is very productive. If you can bring those kinds of forces together to reinforce each other.
All right, one more question. Yes, sir.
Is this on? Yeah. Karthikeya Sarabhai from the Center for Environment Education.
Sir, can I request you to speak louder?
Yeah, Karthikeya Sarabhai from the Center for Environment Education. When Abdul Kalam was president, he often talked about this thing which he called Pura, which is providing urban services in rural areas. Now, I wonder when we are looking at new models for India, whether we are taking urbanization that are into major metros as the only way forward or as an inevitability, or the fact that we have so many small towns that whether we should put emphasis on providing that services in smaller establishments, the smaller towns, to decrease the carbon footprint of these cities. And because of the internet, because of what we saw happening post-COVID, it is possible and it's viable today to work that way. Now, what is happening in many of our cities is that the rich are moving out onto the periphery because they can afford it. And if you ask a housing developer, they say, no, we are building a lot of things outside, but they are for the rich, who can work through internet and everything else. And we are seeing this change happening because of technology. So I was wondering whether we are rethinking our urban policy or are we taking it as an inevitable?
Would you like to take that? Oh, you didn't get the... I think if I understand it correctly, because the voice was a little muffled, are we going to have the same blueprint when we're developing towns and villages as we have in cities? Is that the question broadly?
Yeah, are we just focusing on the inevitable that large cities will become bigger metropolitan areas? Or are we consciously trying to develop smaller towns, smaller cities, villages, so that they become viable modern places to live in?
All right. So where you reduce the migration into larger cities?
Larger cities have more carbon footprints.
Yes.
No, I think certainly any type of greater localization of development, etc., will help in this sphere. This is a possibility, which is now more easier. One of the things that you can say about the new energy, wind and solar, is it is possible to have decentralization to much greater extent with wind and solar energy than with highly centralized sources of coal-based power and so on. In fact, the fact is the energy system will change because nobody owns wind and solar energy. The energy source is not owned by anybody. It's entirely a matter of what can be done. So yes, certainly localization will help. And the other thing that will help is the emergence of information technology and so on. I think that's the future that is ahead of us. If you are interested, I have a nice piece in the Contributions on Indian Sociology on this. It's called Energy, Climate, and Structural Change. Have a look at it.
All right. I think we will take a short break and wrap this session. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the eminent panelists. Let's have a big round of applause for them. That was truly an enlightening and pertinent discussion. And I'd like to thank you, Ms. Inamdar, for expertly steering the panel as well. I request our speakers to please remain on stage to receive their G20 mementos to commemorate this special event. Let me invite the G20 DWG co-chair, Ms. Inam Gambhir, on stage to please present mementos to our esteemed panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I will need a lot of applause for our panelists, and that will also energize us, so to say. So I'm going to request you, ma'am, to present the first one to Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA. Let's have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Ma'am, may I request you to present the next one to Dr. Atsushi Vatabe, Program Director, Institute for Global Environment Strategies. Let's welcome, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank him with a big round of applause. Thank you so much for the applause. Ma'am, please present to Mr. Nitin Desai, Chair Terry, and former Secretary, Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, UN. Let's have a big round of applause to Mr. Nitin Desai. Thank you for the applause, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Navroz Dubash, Professor, Center for Policy Research. We thank you very much, sir. Please accept this small token. A big round of applause for him as well. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, our very able moderator, Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Can we have the memento for Ms. Inamdar? Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, Senior Editor, ET Now. Thank you very much once again. Panelists, the photographers may need a photo opportunity, a group photo opportunity of the panel, and I would request Ms. Gambhir to please join them. Thank you once again. Thank you, ma'am, for doing the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now really my honor to call upon our first inspirational speaker for today, Ms. Ligia Noronha, the UN Assistant Secretary General and Head, UN Environment, New York, who's going to be sharing her perspective on achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Please help me welcome the lady with a big round of applause, Ms. Ligia Noronha, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Oh, that light is too strong. It gets me in the eye. So I'm indeed absolutely honored to be here today. I'm not going to be an inspirational speaker, but I'm very happy to share my views and of course congratulate the government of India for this very important initiative that they've just started. But I want to take back a little bit on where we've started today. And this panel was amazing because it really helped me also to put forward these ideas. If you look at 50 years, this year we had Stockholm plus 50, which is 50 years since the environmental movement started. And one of the important findings, which the CEEW and the SCI report, was about how we moved from a situation of underdevelopment and scarcity to one of overdevelopment and affluence, and the planetary footprints that went with it. And this is really important to think about, because this is where we had Mr. Nitin Desai just mentioned the issues of overconsumption that we're going to hear about. All this has given rise to a certain amount of environmental and social injustices. And as a result of that, we've seen it in the number of COPs that we've had this year, a certain amount of distrust between countries of the North and countries of the South, and between peoples within countries. And so this distrust is creating a certain momentum for change. We see this particularly amongst young people. Young people have been talking about what is it in it for them for the future. There is a growing angst about climate injustice. There's a growing angst about environmental degradation. There's a real rising concern that the future for them is not so bright. This is not just what we hear in the COPs or what we hear on Fridays for the Future, but this is what we've been hearing when groups come to meet with us in our own offices saying, you know, what's in it for us? So ladies and gentlemen, this is a time for us all to listen to what the youth have to say, to what the vulnerable have to say, to what the marginal have to say, but we are not listening because they haven't had the opportunity to voice them sometimes. It's in this context that we also need to look at the fact that we're not meeting any of the goals that we said we were going to meet. And we've been hearing that since morning. The IPCC has already said that, the IPBES on biodiversity has mentioned it. We are in a situation where the global commitments are not being met. And we are in a situation where they have to be met. We are in a situation we have to scale up all of these. And yet we have a number of what we call hurdles on the way. The war, for example, has created new concerns about energy security in many countries. This has also created food security concerns in many countries. So the kinds of dynamics that we're hearing today Similar to the dynamics you've heard before, energy security, priorities of what is it that we should be focusing on, what is it that, what should be the pace of the transition, development versus the environment. And so in this context, what we're hearing today is really welcome. But the important thing to note is that we need system level changes, and we've already been hearing that. System level changes in terms of low or carbon or zero carbon economies. We need circularity, we need cleanliness, we need restoration, and of course we need the financial alignment with the real economy. Now, one of the reasons I'm here is because we've been working on sustainable consumption and production SDG 12 for a number of years. The 10-year framework of programs completes 10 years, December 22. And it's just been given an extension. And yet we feel that it has not achieved enough. The SDG 12 has not achieved enough because many of the programs of the SDG 12 of the Sustainable Consumption Production 10-year framework of programs has resulted in policy instruments which have been disconnected, and we need this collective movement forward. We need to move to what we've been hearing about in terms of creating this collective action. So if you look at the energy sector, and we've heard quite a bit just now about it, we see that in a way you have an alignment of market forces. We have an alignment of these market forces with moral objectives, because there's a beginning of realization that not only is it profitable to have renewable energy, but this will also align with the fact that this addresses climate change. It also addresses other environmental issues like air pollution. But it's still not accelerating and not achieving the pace of change that we need. And this is where we've been hearing the consumer needs to come in. And so we need to then focus on the consumer. But we've also heard from Mr. Nitin Desai, and this is very important, what about the government consumer? So before I get into some of the aspects of life, let's also focus on the fact that the government is also a consumer, and therefore the government also needs some kind of attention across the world. And an interesting new net zero government initiative, which was launched at the COP27, is really an interesting one, and it already has 18 or 19 governments connected with it. And it's important because it will create those market changes that we've just heard about, because the procurement from government can range between 13 to 20% of GDP, depending on which country. And so that procurement can create those market churnings that are required, push the price down, introduce new technologies, and therefore have a new system in place. So just to put it out there as being important to take this forward. But the consumer, the individual consumer, is important, as we've just been hearing about life and this new movement. Lifestyles and consumption are obviously very interconnected. But we've also heard in the last panel about the importance of understanding underconsumption and overconsumption. Strangely enough, the SDG 12 does not talk about underconsumption, it talks about overconsumption. But we don't talk sufficiently about underconsumption, about the fact that there are many who do not have access to energy, do not have access to housing, do not have access to education. So underconsumption is also an issue that needs to be considered by LiFE, as is overconsumption. But there is another one that I want to bring to attention, and it's been kind of touched upon, which is aspirational consumption. And aspirational consumption, ladies and gentlemen, is what it means. It's a consumption to aspire to something. And what is interesting about it is that if you start looking at aspirational consumption, you see that the way the aspirational consumption unfolds depends on the socioeconomic context of which we're talking about. So you can have aspirational consumption at the bottom of the pyramid, and there's a lot of research which is linked with this aspirational consumption at the bottom of the pyramid, which are people who have very low incomes, very often cannot meet their basic needs, and yet would like stylish footwear, would like televisions, would like the things that everybody else has, and they have every right to do so. That is aspirational consumption at the bottom of the pyramid. But there's also aspirational consumption among the millennials and the young middle classes in emerging markets. And interesting, advertising research, and I'm going to read this out because I can't remember all these facts and figures, they say that they're materialistic oriented while at the same time aspiring to be sustainable in their purchases and beliefs. adopting lifestyles that privilege becoming over owning. In a survey done in 2012, aspirational consumers are the largest consumer segment, 35% average, with clear dominance in the two largest developing economies, India 42%, China 53%. But these are linked with also their values, which are concerns about climate and biodiversity. And if you then take into account the fact that UNESCO in their World Survey shows up that climate and biodiversity are huge concerns among young people, then you see that many of these concerns of this aspirational group are linked with also the moral objectives that we're talking about. In the developed world, research in the US refers to this consumption of the dominant elite and consists also of conspicuous production, conspicuous leisure, and inconspicuous consumption. But even here, this is linked with the aspiration to be new versions of better humans in all aspects of their lives. So the point I'm trying to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is this aspirational consumer, each one in different socioeconomic contexts, who exist and who maybe can be of use to this movement. So the question here is, could this aspirational consumption, through this link to values and sustainability, help trigger deliberative processes and organized movements to turbocharge the systemic changes that we've been talking about to address the planetary and inequality crises? So the point is not just the individual, not just the consumer, but you do have the system-wide changes that we want. So how do we interconnect and create these interfaces? 3 ideas for you, and then I will stop. To enable this kind of coming together. And I'm drawing here from researchers in business, in consumption, and in public policy. So one would be, make the affordable and sustainable aspirational. So whenever you talk about something which is affordable and something which is sustainable, make it also aspirational in the marketing, in the way this is marketed. And a good example is what we call frugal innovations. And there's so much of that happening in India, in Kenya, and a number of countries in Africa, that we can really take this forward. Frugal innovations are innovations which are very much, sometimes local, sometimes circular, they're environmentally conscious, so they can be made into these. They can be encouraged to be developed in this way. Now, if you create positive aspiration narratives around frugal innovations, there might, which are also circular in design, there could be an opportunity here to align the need for new goods and services with also these innovations which can come together to address the needs of people. And this can happen in cooling, in food, in electronics, in housing, in mobility, etc. But this requires, so the business researchers tell us, a responsible aspirational marketing approach, which means that you do not take advantage of the people in the bottom of the pyramid, but you develop an aspirational marketing approach which allows this kind of support to encourage this kind of consumption. There's also this whole discussion around engaging influencers and institutions, and Bollywood in India is one great example to promote sustainable consumption. So you don't have just the usual ambassadors for different causes, but you bring some of these influences into this conversation. There's interesting research done on cyber leisure and how cyber leisure is actually creating social capital. We've always thought that cyber and being so much on the internet could actually make people less inclined to connect with each other. But now there are movements which you've seen through cyber leisure and through cyber connections. Could these be used in order to bring about these kinds of movements? My second level, so this was the first one, which was to make the sustainable and affordable aspirational. My second point is about enabling responsible consumer choices through investment in consumer capabilities. And we've heard a lot about that, but I'm using this term from the work of Langlois and Costello, which is what are the consumer capabilities that you need to be able to do that? And we heard examples from Gauri just now when you said, yes, I want to change my rooftop I want to change my electricity, but I don't have solar rooftop. So what do I do? So you have to be able to give the consumer the capabilities, the routines which are required to enable that consumption choice to be made. How is that to be done? How do you make information about the product more standardized and more transparent to enable the consumer to choose the right product? How do you build trust through accountability and reporting on supply chain processes so that I as a consumer know that if I'm buying something which says that it is a clean product right through, that is true and holds true, and it's not just greenwashing. Sustainable urban planning and infrastructure and policies for circularity of use become very important in this context. And one great example is the metro in Delhi, which may not be known to our G20 colleagues here, but it has this pink compartment for women, which draws the attention of women to the fact that they can ride in the separate one, so they're safer. And therefore, not only do they have the knowledge that this compartment exists, but they also have the knowledge that this compartment, because it's for women, is also more safe, and you also have police around there. And so it encourages public mobility. So these are the little nudges that are very important, but they don't happen unless infrastructure is there. And so the infrastructure needs to be in place already. And of course, you need regulations to keep out the products which create environmental harm. And the best example of this, apart from India, which had its single-use plastic regulation, Kenya introduced a ban on plastics, and I lived there for 5 years. Immediately the day after that, you had a whole lot of jeans, old jeans, come into the market and being cut up and converted into bags for marketing. And so these things can happen, and they do happen when regulation is imposed. My third and last point is to maximize the public value of industrial strategies. And this is from Marina Mazzucato, who has been talking about the importance of the state coming back, not just handing everything over to the private sector, but saying that if we want to create this change, the state needs to be stronger, and the state needs to work more with the private sector in order to make sure that the private sector shares the risks and the rewards of innovations and early investments. And of course, she uses COVID as an example, but there are many others. And therefore, you can invest in extended producer responsibility, you can regulate planned obsolescence, you can regulate extended product lifetimes. And so these things enable the consumer to be able to hang on to the product for a longer time, to repair, recycle, reuse, which are the key R's of circularity. Increasingly, the voice of the consumer needs to be embedded in the product, and therefore the consumer and what the consumer needs. And we heard this before. How does this get introduced into the design of the product? And this also comes when you have the government as an important consumer, because the government can lay out its sustainability requirements and force the industry and the market to pick it up as it go along. And finally, the issue of pricing, which is so important and so key to introducing natural resource pricing into the product, because part of the reasons why things have taken so long to come to fruition in terms of sustainability is that we've always had a mispricing. And so the products are cheap because they do not include into them the cost of the natural resources which are being used or degraded as a result of this. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we have to mobilize the financial sector, and there's a lot going on in the financial sector. The financial net zero banking, net zero investors, net zero insurers, they're coming together to create this movement to push the real economy into net zero economies. And this is something that we need to embrace, because that will also help the consumer be included much more into the design of things. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to congratulate the government of India for having this initiative. And I think it enables us to take this to another level, but it needs to be pulled together with a number of other strings in order to have the system level changes that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your very insightful views, Ms. Norona. Ladies and gentlemen, as we just heard, moving towards sustainable production and consumption systems is a key driver of LiFE. I now take the privilege of inviting Dr. Arunabha Ghosh back on stage to tell us about the economic framework of LiFE. Let's welcome him back again with a big round of applause. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. I have a 10-year-old daughter. A couple of months ago, she had a homework assignment on the SDGs. My wife works on sustainable food. So she says, Mama works on food, you work on energy, environment, water, what's left for me? And then she came back with the answer herself. She said, I'm going to talk about Sustainable Development Goal number 17. If you don't have partnerships, how else will you get anything done? So in the circular economy of SDGs, I think SDG 17 should be SDG 1. I represent the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Our ambition is to use data, integrated analysis and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of resources. Now, how can we do that if we don't bring in sustainable lifestyles into the framework of driving SDGs altogether? This is the ambition that we are setting out for ourselves. Whether it is Lifestyle for Environment as a national mission in India, or as an agenda for lifestyles at the center of driving the SDG agenda. So if I could just have my presentation on the screen, I'm going to take you through what we call the economic framework for life. Clock is ticking, I know. You want your coffee. All right, while we wait for it. One of the things we have to think about very clearly is not just, and we heard about in the first panel, not just about what the objective is from an individual perspective, but how does this change things at an economy-wide level? You heard me asking this question of Mr. Iyer. You heard me asking this question of Sherpa, Mr. Khan. So even at CEEW, we were thinking, what does it mean to take our analysis? We are nerds who look at the analysis to advise on policy. But what does this mean in actually getting our own actions to be demonstrably different from what we are observing? So for instance, we built out this sustainable office that you can see. Every material in this office was upcycled from our previous office. The flooring that you walk into is made of 100% biodegradable material. The carpeting that you go through is made in a factory running 100% on renewable energy. The more than 1,000 plants in the office are irrigated by recycled water. So it's not enough for us to just crunch the numbers. It's important to try and see how at an individual level, at an institutional level, at an economy level, we can start demonstrating that sustainability is aspirational, available, affordable, and possible. Mission Life and Lifestyle for Environment is at the heart of driving the Sustainable Development Agenda. It's not just about SDG 13 on climate change. It's not just about SDG 12 about sustainable production and consumption. It is also about poverty, hunger, access to healthcare, gender equality. So when we count GDP, here is how I was taught how to count GDP. Count how much you're spending on consumption, how much you're spending on investment, how much the government is spending, Mr. Desai mentioned this, and how much are our next exports. How can you go from this version of GDP to a different version of how much are we spending on lifestyle or sustainable lifestyle-based consumption? Sustainable investments, sustainable expenditure from government. How are even net exports are more and more sustainable? So can we move to a more sustainable count of GDP? So it's not actually a substitute for development, it is actually a growth driver. So let me quickly talk to you about 4 pillars around which we can bring this idea much more front and center, both by nudging behavior but also by enabling markets. Let's look at consumption. We talked a lot about energy. Let's move towards agriculture. An example from the state of Odisha, the Odisha Millet Mission, has now been focusing on improving the nutrition content that we are ingesting, as well as reviving millets as a much more resilient crop. So nearly 200,000 farmers working across 19 districts on reviving millets, getting the subsidies from the government, a 14x increase in ragi, a type of millet, value doubling in terms of per hectare, as well as increased incomes for the farmers. But the same individual consumption can move towards enabling an economy that is driving the story around millets. So India is promoting the International Year of Millets of the United Nations in 2023. It has 33% of the global production of millets, but potentially you can enable this market through, for instance, the midday meal scheme, with potentially 265 million daily midday meals being delivered. India is also where a number of states are practicing what we call in Hindi, Prakriti Kheti, or natural farming, combining agroforestry with sustainable farming methods. Just in one state, in another few years, about 6 million farmers will be practicing natural farming. So the consumption story can move from the individual to the economy, for instance, in a sector like agriculture. When we come to pillar 2 for industry and investment, how do we again nudge that behavior? I want to give you an example from something the Honorable Prime Minister talked about when he launched Mission LiFE in October. He was talking about what is the temperature that we set our air conditioners. But it's not just about setting the temperature of the air conditioners. In a hot, humid country like India and across the tropical world, sustainable cooling will be extremely important, because how do we cool our homes without warming the planet is the big question before us. So in a country like India, super efficient ceiling fans is a $20 billion market. Over the course of the next 2 decades, about 100 million energy efficient air conditioners will be could be sold. India is the first country in the world with a comprehensive cooling action plan. So how do you again take the individual household's behavior and move towards something that scales up? The same thing can be done on the economy side. 12 years ago, when the National Solar Mission began, with less than 20 megawatts of solar. Today, India has the 4th largest renewable energy deployed capacity, is the 3rd most attractive market for renewables investment. The Indian Railways will be the first major railway system in the world that will be not just 100% electrified, but will move towards net zero emissions by 2030, creating again business opportunities for a large number of companies. So then we come to government. Again, how does government procurement nudge behavior but also enable markets? Let's go back to farming. India and small farmers across the world use a lot of groundwater. Now, how do we shift the pumping of that groundwater to a more sustainable practice through a means that is both mitigation and adaptation and also delivers resilience? So the KUSUM scheme aims for 25 gigawatts of solar capacity through solar-based irrigation pumps. Already nearly 100,000 pumps have been deployed. The program itself could create more than 500,000 potential job years. And the same government procurement can then enable markets in other areas. For instance, the lighting. The LED light bulb scheme has now ended up distributing more than 368 million LED light bulbs across the country. Over $1 billion of investment in rural areas. The advanced market procurement from government helped to bring down the prices by over 85% within just a few years. A more recent example, as Sherpa Amitabh Kant was also talking about, is cities and our mobility services. So the largest procurement of electric public buses was done just a few months ago, resulting in a purchase of more than 5,000 electric buses. And the next round will be 50,000 electric buses. Analysis that we've been doing at CEEW shows that moving, say, auto rickshaws to electric auto rickshaws in a state like Kerala yields 30% daily savings in fuels. And finally, then we come to net exports. Again, it's small businesses in India that account for 40% of industrial value add, 40% of exports. So how do we trigger small businesses to use cleaner energy? Across the country, we see that there is a potential of more than $50 billion of investment possible for a market for using clean energy solutions in just rural area to drive livelihoods. Potential to create 23 million rural livelihoods in the process. And as a result, India is the first country that has a draft policy framework for driving distributed renewables for livelihoods. Finally, we then come to in the enabling markets again at scale. The largest targets for green hydrogen of any major economy are again here in India. Second largest only in the context of the entire EU's domestic green hydrogen production target. That then creates a huge hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment opportunity, again triggering a large number of businesses that can come together. So I want to close with a story from 10 years ago. That hut you see on the left was a farm laborer's hut in Karnataka that I visited in October 2012. The same month my 10-year-old daughter was born. You might not notice, but there is a small solar panel on his tile roof. At that time, it cost him $400 for that solar panel. But he did it so that he could educate his two daughters who are in the doorway. 10 years on, in October 2022, when Mission LiFE was launched, the same month, Modhera village in Gujarat became the first village in India that was 24/7 powered by renewables. The country that had less than 20 megawatts of solar in 2010 now will be the first major economy that will deploy more renewables through the course of this decade than its entire electricity system. So, is there a take-home message? No. I'm just giving you an act now message. We can count GDP differently. Just sustainable consumption, sustainable investment, sustainable government expenditure, sustainable exports. Because we cannot change the planet on which we live unless we change how we live. Thank you. We will now move into the second panel discussion, again chaired and moderated by Ms. Tamanna Inamdar, but may I also now welcome Mr. Stefan Shikars, the Director, Division of Circular Economy and Environmental Protection from UNIDO. We will have Lord Nicholas Stern joining us online from London. Lord Nicholas Stern, member of the House of Lords of the United Kingdom and chair of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and Environment at the London School of Economics. And we'll again welcome back Dr. Lygia Nerona, UN Assistant Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Environment Program Office in New York. Ms. Inamdar, please take it away and tell us more about how we can drive a new economy that's built on sustainable lifestyles.
So I know everyone's waiting for the coffee break. It's going to be even better after this. As invigorating, hopefully. A great session set up by Runaba. And I also want to come to some of the things that were mentioned, ma'am, in your remarks. I found them very, very interesting. When you talked about underconsumption and aspirational consumption. I'm going to set right into it. We're welcoming Lord Stern as well. I hope you can hear us. I don't know if you can see us. Great to have you on this panel. So very quickly, session one was about what is life, How is it practical? How is it workable? Session 2, I think we should focus on how will it be economically viable? Let's be honest, unless any policy, any measure, any product is economically viable, it is not going to work. No one is going to pay more money for something just because it's sustainable. It's not going to work beyond a point. So that's what we're going to talk about. And which is why, let me begin by what you talked about in terms of underconsumption and aspirational consumption, very relevant to economies like ours, developing economies, where people are still waiting for their time to come. Apna time aayega, for the Indian Bollywood reference. They're not thinking about what is going to be the cost of that aspiration to the economy. How do you get those concepts to sit together? So, if you think about it, every person in this world should have a right to having the basic needs and the basic services that they require, right? So it is true that if you need energy and you need housing and you need all of the things that any individual needs for a good life, then that person is not going to be bothered what it costs the economy. So this is something that needs to be thought through this at the system level, because when Mr. Iyer was talking about toilets, for example, he gave a very clear example of how the toilets were built and then individuals use those toilets, right? So the system provided for or made sure that those toilets were available. So when you talk of underconsumption, you expect that some of these goods already are there for the people of that country. Aspirational consumption is a different type of consumption. In aspirational consumption, it goes beyond affordability. It can even go beyond the basic needs to want to aspire to a life which is more akin to what people at a higher level of the economic system exists. So when you say, what does it mean in terms of aggregation? The fact that you've been using money for fossil fuel subsidies, you've been using it for all other kinds of things. This can be redirected to support, first of all, the basic needs. And at the same time, you can use it to reduce or enable some of the aspirational goods by creating the kind of frugal innovations or innovations which take into account the kinds of aspects that we need for sustainability. So it's not an extra cost. It does not have to be an extra cost because we're already paying a much higher cost through some of these subsidies, which are not always targeted at the poor, but are just there lying out there. Yeah. All right. Let me get Lord Stern in. Lord Stern, we've been talking through this afternoon about Mission LiFE, India's mass movement to build a lifestyle for the environment. What we're trying to understand in this session, how does that sit in with aspirations, with growth models? Is it possible to reorient growth models to include equitable distribution of resources, opportunities for all classes of people, increase an economy, as well as sustain the environment?
I think the short answer to that question is yes, and we must. The whole idea of LiFE is a philosophical approach which leads to changes in behavior, but works through the empowerment of people, the increasing their ability to change their own life, increasing their ability to live life as they would wish, at the same time as fostering responsibility for the environment and people around them. That's the philosophy, and it leads directly, in my view, if done well, to better distribution and better environment. I think there is no conflict between growth on the one hand and redistribution and environment on the other. And actually, I would be a bit stronger than that. I think the drive for sustainable growth, resilient growth, will actually create a stronger growth in itself. Let me give some examples. I've worked, as many of you know, for now 50 years in Indian villages and in Indian agriculture. If you look at better forms of irrigation, if you look at drip irrigation, this is something which Arunabha and all his colleagues will know very well. You save on water, you have higher productivity. It's a very good life example. You're cutting back on waste. If you're able to store your grains in ways which don't get eaten by rats and pests, that's an investment, but it's an investment with very powerful returns, and it reduces waste. If you take an example of the way in which we can waste electricity and water, we all know that the electrical system in India is often unreliable, sometimes comes on in the middle of the night. So if you've got an electric pumping equipment, you might just leave it on in the night, hope it comes on at some point and go to sleep. And then it does come on in the night, and you end up wasting a lot of water, washing away topsoil. If you look at a system of root intensification for rice, where you don't flood the paddy fields, you get higher productivity, you save on water, and you don't release methane from the paddy field. We could go on, but these are all examples where you do things in different ways, you get more out of your inputs, you cause less damage to the environment, you improve living standards for poorer people. There's so many other ways in which we can describe these processes, but we make a very big mistake if we set up a horse race between growth on the one hand and distribution on the other, or growth on the one hand and environment on the other. The challenge is putting them together. And it, of course, means understanding growth in different ways. It means understanding growth beyond simply material output, but in terms of health and education. So much of the lifestyle story here is much better for health. If you walk and you cycle, you're going to be more healthy. But you do depend on government policy to make it safer to walk and to cycle. So all of these are examples where there's a lot that individuals can do. It is a story of growth and a better distribution and better environment, but it's a deeper understanding of what growth means. And it is clearly an area where the enabling powers of society and of government have to work together with individual creativity and responsibility.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
All right. Now, if I turn this way, can you still hear me? I think I'm loud enough. Okay. Mr. Sikar, one term that comes up very often in these conversations is circular economy. I think we can safely say that in India, it's in our DNA to reuse till you can't anymore. If a piece of cloth comes home, we will first wear it, then we'll wipe the home with it, then maybe the floor with it before it's actually thrown. But explain to us how a circular economy can stay relevant as an idea in a world of hyperconsumption, the need for new, and also the need for industry to keep fueling that consumption.
Thank you very much for the question, which is of course very challenging. Once we have solved that, we are a large step forward, to put it mildly. But I want to give some directions into this. So industry, of course, reacts to demand, and of course, it also creates demand. You said rightly so that in India, which is not the case in many developed countries, but in India, you have still the culture of reusing in different roles, products, from t-shirt to rag to packaging material, maybe. That's a very important part of the concept. That is a part of the concept of circular economy, which is consumer oriented. But circular economy goes much further. It starts with wanting to try to keep the resources at its highest use. And actually, the waste, the resource waste that circular economy is battling is not only a societal problem, it's also a problem. It's not only a problem of civil society as well, it's also a problem for industry. Because if industry wastes resources, that means first they pay for these resources, and resources are expensive and actually increasingly scarce. If you stay with your rag, one problem of the global fashion industry is that the cotton production globally will not grow by much anymore. For a certain, even slightly increased price as compared to today, you cannot produce much more cotton. But the amount of fashion, the amount of clothing goes up. So what do? You have a scarce resource problem, and you start getting inventive with using less and less of that resource, of cotton in this case, or any textile, and reuse it, find ways to recycle it into cotton, not into material to burn in a kiln or whatever, but into cotton, and with that into new materials. And these are ways, and I used fashion only as one of many examples, these are ways how industry can increase their financial bottom line and massively reduce their environmental impact, because we all know that cotton, in this example, has a huge environmental impact in its production. The scarcity is actually helping industry to see the actual value, to monetize the actual value, and then to preserve the resource. And we see that increasingly across the board, and the conditions in our world these days are that this value of the resources, whether it's energy resources, whether it's mineral resources, whether it's natural resources, this is becoming more and more visible, and with that, for the industry, more and more interesting to preserve and more economical. So I think we will have there a huge move. And industry then will influence consumers. It will become more interesting. I mean, Licia was talking of aspirational consumerism. And consumers aspiring to someone. You were asking me about products from the industry for people who want to have newer, the most modern, the most interesting consumption goods. But this is actually not a God-given, it's a fashion. And fashions are brought about by civil society and by advertising from industry. You can change this fashion. I saw it earlier in my life when I was young, in my teens. The fashion was actually to have old things, vintage. Vintage was the fashion. People were not proud to have the newest and most expensive product. They were proud to have something where their grandfathers and grandmothers had already worked with. And this kind of change can be brought about by many actors, including industry, but of course also including civil society and government.
So vintage is making a comeback. That's for sure. Yes, we will definitely come to the audience, but Ms. Licia, just a word from you, because you spoke about the role of influencers, the role of actors, etc., in making sustainable and eco-friendly cool. Do you think that's the way to go?
Why not? If you want to make everybody part of the solution, you have to get in everyone to do their little bit. And if advertisers in the media at the moment are sometimes giving the wrong signals and making the wrong kinds of aspirations, then we need to rope them in to give the right kinds of aspirations, right in terms of sustainability. We cannot change people's preferences. That is not our job. Each one will have their own preferences. All you can do is enable consumers to change if they would like to change. But given that advertisers and these influencers have so much power over what we do, so all the peers have, then it becomes, I think, of interest to see whether they can help carry the message forward, the message that we are in a crisis, that the quality of life is only going to get worse if we do not look at this, and also to understand what is the good life when you have more and more inequality around you, when you have more and more of the environmental degradation. So the understanding of good life needs to be taken forward by the influencers. And if we can do it through the medium of film or social media or anything else, this is a great way of encouraging a different way of thinking amongst these, all of us who are aspiring to a good life.
I know you're keen to open to questions, but I'm going to pose one question to Lord Stern, and then we'll open up to the audience. Lord Stern, when we speak about changes in lifestyle, changes in consumption patterns, it always sometimes seems like an unfair rule where economies, people, societies who haven't had a chance to really consume yet have to pay the same price as those who generationally have managed to consume a lot more. And this is something you said as well about angst in the younger generation. They're going to have to pay for the price of our sins. How do you make that trade-off more equal, or is it just too bad?
I think the challenge is to do things in different ways. We know now how to do things, how to make electricity, which is energy, of course, fundamental for development. We know how to do it in ways which are not as destructive as before. So I think the challenge is not to insist that we must now, from here on, grow in just the same way as before, and those who haven't had much of a chance should have a bigger chance to grow in the same way as before. I don't see the logic in that. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia way back I was on a panel with him in a COP in 2011 in Durban, and he said it's not justice to foul the planet because other people have fouled it in the past. The challenge is to do things in different ways, and we now understand that we can overcome poverty, raise living standards in a ways that are no longer destructive. So our obligation is to focus, I think, still more strongly, given the difficulties a changing environment poses, particularly for poor people. Our obligation across the world is to support the rising of living standards, particularly in poor countries and poor communities in poor countries, in different ways. And we know how to do that. So it's not actually putting barriers in the way of growth. It's the other way around. It's enhancing opportunity for a different form of growth. And I think those who have grown in dirty ways in the past have a special obligation to help and support in these different ways of doing things. But to insist that we must grow in the dirty ways that other people grew before us is not a logic that I could understand when we know how to do things differently and know we must do different things differently. So what we're talking about when we talk about life is increases in living standards, but in different ways from we've done them before, different ways of production, different ways of consumption, and indeed different objectives in our understanding of what constitutes improvements in well-being, and particularly around, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the way I would put it. And the idea that we have to grow in dirty ways because other people have grown in dirty ways in the past is, I think, misleading in logic and deeply damaging. Our challenge, those of us who think about policy, those of us who are working, is to try to foster ways of doing things differently. And if you would allow me one footnote on the leadership and the role models, I'm teaching in a university, and one of the great things is that I get older, but the students stay the same age. And you see different cohorts come through. And the cohort coming through now in our universities, obviously London School of Economics has loads of Indian students. That's one of the great pleasures. But it's beyond that. At universities across the world, the young people coming through are insisting on their own futures in a way that's very constructive, insisting on their own futures as being influenced by the environment in which they're going to live. And they choose now where they're going to work. They choose where they put their savings. They choose how they travel. They choose what sorts of ways they have to heat their homes. They choose their pension funds. They choose what they eat. And they are putting pressure. So as we talk about the role of leaders, we should also talk about the role of people who are acting and speaking and putting pressure on decision makers. And I know that we're in a very difficult circumstance, and it's going to be really hard to break out of the terrible damage that we've already done. But when I look at the young people and think about how they understand the issues, not simply shouting at us that we must do something. They're right about that, of course, they are right. But actually it's deeper than that. They know what to do. They're talking about what to do. They're using their own decisions to put pressure. They're using their own activities in politics to put pressure. And that's the kind of story that we have to think about, as well as, of course, those in leadership and roles which are influencers.
Absolutely. I think we should hear from the audience. We have a fantastic opportunity here, and people who are really experts in their field to answer any of your questions. Yes, ma'am. We can get a mic to her.
Good evening. We've been hearing about systems thinking, we've been hearing about circular economy, and of course also about the problems with what has gone wrong in the past. As a way forward, is there any framework, toolbox, toolkit that really brings all these disparate pieces, because that's what systems thinking really is about? Are there any such tools that we can actually implement? While it's great to know and learn about so many things, some specific tools or frameworks that we can actually use and implement that brings together consumers, corporates, businesses, and academicians, because they have a role to play as well.
I'll take that to you. A specific framework. You could hear that, right?
Yes, I could. Thank you very much. Interesting question. Very brief answer. There is no recipe book for that, but that doesn't mean it's not possible to cook. The time that we have in front of us, with the transformation that we have in front of us, a social transformation, economic transformation, is not something where standard answers of thought could be applied. And we heard in the previous part of this LiFE event today, we heard that the global south, the developing countries and middle-income countries are in a different starting point. They will develop their own way forward. And that means it's not a cookie cutter approach. This time of cookie cutter approach, taking it from some industrialized country and then implementing it, imposing it often on a developing country, that's over. But the elements of the recipes, they are known. Circular economy is one element. Renewable energy is one element. How to implement them, how to empower repair people to repair better, to make an old product a virtually new one, how to create markets for that. These components are known. The country has to find its own way to implement them, to incentivize the public, to advise the public how beauty, for example, a recycled product is, how good it is to save water for everyone. And so the different actors, consumers themselves, government, industry, have their role in this. There is no such thing as a blueprint, but there are lots of elements, and all we need to do is stitch them together properly. And I think this G20 presidency is a great opportunity to provide a manual on how to stitch together these elements.
Could I just come in briefly on that? One specific answer to that question is to look at the way in which government is organized. And most governments are organized through line ministries. There's a ministry responsible for power, there's a ministry responsible for steel, there's a ministry responsible for education. And systems thinking is about many things, but in particular, understanding how these different things fit together, and how actions in one of those fronts profoundly affects actions on other fronts. How we produce our steel has profound implications for water and air and so on. And so one of the important things that we have to grasp now is the organization of government. And you need something strong in government that looks across the whole waterfront, so that your government is not dominated just by line ministries.
All right. Would you want to take that very, very quickly? We're almost out of time.
No, I was just going to say, you had the question about instruments and tools, and there are some for specific sectors, the high impact sectors, and you'll find them in the One Planet Network website. So, you can meet me after this and I'll put you in touch with that website. Thank you.
All right. I see the time's up sign, but this is honestly something that we can talk about a lot more. Thank you to all of you for joining us on the second session today.
Thank you so much for bringing our attention more towards the economic framework. You're now going to hear from the final two speakers and I'm sure you're going to be extremely inspired by their life lessons and their life's work. So first we're going to have Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, engineer, innovator, education reformist, founder and president of the board, the Students' Education and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, or SECMOL. Before he comes on stage and tells us more, we're going to play a short video which showcases the kind of work that he is doing in Ladakh, but also as an example for what we all need to follow. Bear with us for a few seconds as we load up that video onto the screen.
Hi, this is Sonam Wangchuk from a very windy Ladakhi afternoon. Let me show you this valley where I am. It's called the Phyang Valley, where we are building an alternative university for mountain development and climate change adaptation. The sad story of this valley is that in 2006, there was a devastating flash flood which took many lives and washed away many farms, fields and houses. When we asked people, when was the last time you had seen such flash floods, the answer was, we don't remember. The next flash flood was in 2010, and the next 2015, and the next 2017. The mountains are facing the wrath of nature in the face of climate change. For the last 30 years, together with my team, we have been struggling, or rather playing, in these mountains with earth, sun, ice and fire to help climate change mitigation and adaptation. With my team, I have been designing and building many institutions, all run on solar energy, using the sun for space heating, cooking, pumping, lighting, and so on. Of late, we have been building ice stupa, which is a form of artificial baby glaciers that store the water from the winter in the form of large ice cones till the springtime when farmers need water the most. But today we feel that all these innovations are just small fixes that will get us nowhere if the rest of the world goes on with business as usual with their high-tech lives and polluting lifestyles. We want to start a global movement starting from the mountains of Ladakh to appeal to the people of the world to please live simply so that we in the mountains may simply live.
Mr. Wangchuk, you've come a long way to teach us how to live better. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I bring you all very warm greetings from a frozen mountain region. That's Ladakh. I started this morning, if you can have the images, early morning to bring these warm greetings. This is the region of Himalayas and Hindu Kush, which is next to the two poles, the largest reserve of snow and ice, the third pole, and it carries roughly 50,000 or more glaciers and serves a quarter of the Earth's population, roughly 2 billion people directly or indirectly depend on it. And as I flew, this is what I saw from the windows of my aeroplane. You can even see in this very picture roughly 10 glaciers. Now, that's amazing, but I have come here to bring you the message of what's happening to this third pole, which is so important for our sustenance. Clicker? For changing? Yeah. This is a big glacier that I have been seeing for the last 25 years or so, the Drangdrum Glacier. It used to be towering above you on the road to Zanskar. Today it's a shadow of itself. It's melting very fast in the face of global warming. And it's not going silently. It's becoming a torrent at the snout or the end of the glacier, bringing all the fast melting water down and again causing havoc. Not silently, it's going. Next one. In 2006, I went to volunteer in a village which was devastated by a flash flood, the village of Pyang. And while helping, I asked an elderly person in his 80s when was the last time he had seen, and he said, I didn't see any in my lifetime. I've only heard stories. That was 2006. Next was 2010, when 1,000 lives were lost and many houses and belongings just 4 years later. And the next one was 2013. The next one was 2017. So the glaciers of the Himalayas are going away. While we talk of environmental issues and changes needed, often we take them as some drawing room discussion or some slogan. I just wanted to bring you the gravity of the situation firsthand where I come from. And while we have been fixing little things with solar heated buildings for mitigation and artificial glaciers for adaptation, we thought that we had to bring this SOS message to the big cities of the world where it all starts. We are at the receiving end for no fault of ours. So the next picture shows how, after all these other innovations, just before COVID struck, we started a campaign to appeal to the world to please live simply, so we may in the mountains live simply. It's called ilivesimply.org, and it's presented in a fun way, you know, because young people need to get involved, children need to get involved, and you can't keep preaching. So we just present it in a crowdfunding format. Now, crowdfunding normally is done to collect money, but in this case, the planet does not need your money. It needs lifestyle change. And therefore, on this site, you can contribute or donate pledges for the planet, and the site equates into equivalent imaginary dollars. For example, if you pledge to switch from cars to bicycling or walking, even better, it may make a contribution of $500. Or if you switch from aeroplanes to trains, could be $1,000. If you switch from wasting food to being very careful or plant trees, the site equates it to what amount you are contributing for the planet. This campaign was started with the support and partnership of UNEP and has been touching many lives. Some $23 million have been collected, that kind of green dollars, and I would like that we become the richest in the world in these green dollars rather than the real dollars, which may not be as effective as this. Now, many people ask, why are you bothering and pestering individuals alone? It's the governments and the big businesses that make biggest impacts. I, on the contrary, think that it is individuals. When individuals change through whatever way, from campaigns or influences or through the education system, then in democracies, governments change with the people. Governments reflect people's priorities, and commerce also does that. So therefore, hopefully, if we touch number of people around the world, then the governments of those countries will also get in tune with it, or they'll be out of their business. That's normally true, but in India, I'm really proud that our Prime Minister has started this, the mission of LiFE, as we are discussing here. And that's very, very, very unusual, because contrary to what my theory is, in India, very few people know or care about the environment. Whereas in Europe and America, lot of people, lot of voters care, and yet their leaders are not responding. It is very unusual that in India, a Prime Minister has been leading, I think globally, in actions for climate sustainability. I would urge that agencies like the United Nations should perhaps institute a title or an award for the greenest Prime Minister or the head of state. Similarly, in countries, for the greenest chief ministers and the greenest corporates, and that could perhaps make this faster. I won't take more of your time. I would once again appeal to all of you, and through you, the people of the nations and the big cities of the world, to please live simply, so that we in the mountains may simply live. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wangchuk, for taking us to the mountains, and I hope they stay as beautiful as they are. I, of course, like to hike there, but you are the one who's keeping it all together. If only we could change how we live. The final speaker, I should say the final speaker who will tell us a little bit more about listening, is Dr. Shannon Olson, Global Director of the ECHO Network, who will join us on stage. Dr. Olson is a chemical ecologist who listens to nature's chemical conversations across India's diverse ecosystems. I first listened to Shannon in the middle of the pandemic, when we came together virtually to come forward with an idea for a more sustainable, greener recovery out of the devastation that we were in. Shannon, looking forward to you closing us off and telling us a little bit more how to listen better to live sustainably.
About 15 years ago, the Washington Post performed a social experiment. Dressed in jeans, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap, one of the most celebrated violinists of our time, Joshua Bell, performed solo in the Washington, D.C. metro station during morning rush hour. Over the course of his 43-minute performance, over 1,000 people would have the chance to hear the works of art that emanated from his 300-year-old and $3 million Stradivarius violin. Now, the experiment was simple. How many would stop and listen to a virtuoso in the subway? So I'm going to ask a poll here. How many of you out there, thinking about your normal morning commute, if you had suddenly heard the most transcendent musical verses of your life, how many of you would have maybe stopped for a minute and just taken a listen? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, after 43 minutes, only 7 people, Less than 0.1% of those travelers stopped for more than a minute. And in fact, only 2% actually left any money in the violin case at his feet. So what happened to the other 98% of the travelers who didn't even glance at one of the most famous violinists in the world? Well, the Washington Post interviewed those travelers later, and actually many of them said they in fact did hear the virtuoso, but they were too preoccupied with their upcoming workday to be able to stop and listen. One person didn't even hear the violin playing because they were wearing headphones, and the shoe shiner that was working right next door actually was annoyed at the music because it was interfering with her workday. And of course, a few of them heard and simply didn't care. Now, this mix of viewpoints actually mirrors our planet's response to the Sustainable Development Goals. We too are not taking the time to stop, listen, and engage with those goals. Anthony Leiserowitz, who is head of the Yale program on climate change communication, has surveyed people across the world on their perceptions of climate change. And in both the US and actually right here in India, he has identified 6 groups of people that range from the convinced and the informed to the disinterested and the disengaged. And those 6 groups actually mirror those persons on the subway as well as most of the people on this planet, because many of us are like those bureaucrats in that morning commute. We are too encumbered by other seemingly more important things in our lives than to address any SDGs on a daily basis. And some of us are like that shoe shiner that are so crushed under the weight of disempowerment that we simply cannot listen. And still others are like the person wearing headphones, and we're so far removed from the problem that we can't even identify it. But you see, everyone in that metro had the capacity to appreciate the music, and they said they did appreciate music. Just like we also, if you ask, appreciate the value of the SDGs. We are not ignorant. We're not unaware. We're simply unavailable. Now, Prime Minister Modi unveiled Mission Life during COP26 in Glasgow as a collective response with 3 different stages. First, increase demand by nudging behavior. Second, increase supply by enabling markets. And finally, increase policy for long-term aspirational change. But with 98% of us unavailable, how are we even going to get people to stop, listen, and engage with those stages? Well, first of all, we have to get people to pay attention. And I don't just mean the people on the subway. I mean CEOs. I mean world leaders like yourself, academics like me, and actually all the 98% of the demographic that makes up our planet. And it can't be just by making a lot of noise about the SDGs, because Joshua Bell was making a lot of noise on that morning commute, and still over 1,000 people passed him by. But if a friend or a neighbor or a relative had asked those travelers to stop, they would have been much more likely to do so, because people need people they trust, and people trust people that they know. So we also need to enable community champions in every single community and honestly in every single home who are empowered and informed of the latest information on the SDGs. And social innovation organizations across the world, as well as public-private partnerships that bring local organizations and local governments together, are excellent mechanisms for building that capacity, for training, and for empowering local sustainability champions in every community across this world. Now, next, we have to get people to also listen, right? They have to value taking the time and the effort to engage with the SDGs. When the Washington Post actually interviewed the people who did actually stop and listen to the music, many of them had played the violin as children. And some of them actually recognized Joshua Bell to be the celebrity that he was. You see, they had a personal connection with that music. They had a personal value for it. The next stage in life is to enable markets, to foster solutions that connect with public values. But I can tell you, as a scientist, that while many innovations start with people like me in laboratories, not many of those innovations necessarily take public values into account. And that's why we need to start building human-centered innovation that starts by incorporating the public into the scientific process right from the beginning. At the ECHO Network, we connect communities with academia and businesses and government and organizations all in the same room to create something known as communities of practice, who learn from each other first and co-develop solutions together and then iteratively enhance those solutions over time. Now, finally, we have to keep people engaged with the SDGs, not just today, but for the rest of their lives. And Mission Life has identified the role of decision makers and their importance in sustaining those ideas for our collective future. But for the past 50 years, we have presented our future as one in crisis. And in fact, it is a crisis. It is tragic and it is terrifying. And it is, of course, affecting those of us who are the least empowered to address these issues. But fear has never motivated long-term change. Fear causes retreat. It's only hope that can foster long-term action. And I am hopeful, because for the first time in human civilization, we can consider completely new ways of living, new ways of moving, new ways of growing and eating food, new ways of wearing clothing, new ways of building cities, and new ways of living with each other and with our ecosystems. And as a scientist, that excites me, because we don't even have to go to Mars to figure out how to live on another planet. We actually just have to figure out how to live on this one right here. And that's why I moved to India in 2014, because I know that those countries that are most impacted by a changing climate are also the most able to identify discoveries that can sustain it. And I also know, as a scientist in India, that this process starts not here, but here. It starts by investing in people and not just in innovations. I founded the ECHO Network because I believe, like in ECHO, in the power of listening and the power of first listening and then giving back by building trust through local champions, instilling value through human-centered innovation, and creating a sense of responsibility through communities of practice who live that new reality they've created for themselves. So let's start now. Stop, listen, and engage before the train leaves the station. Can you hear it? Our planet's calling for you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. We are not available. What a powerful message. The greatest threat facing humanity is not climate change. It's a lack of empathy of other people, of other colors, of other cultures, of other genders, of other geographies. If we could only listen, maybe we could chart a better way forward. I'm now going to request the co-chair of the Developing Working Group, Ms. Enam Gambhir, to please come up on stage and give out the mementos first to the speakers from the second panel, as I call out their names. May I request Mr. Stefan Sikars to please come up on stage, please. request Dr. Ligia Narona, UN Assistant Secretary General. Please come up on stage. Stefan, thank you for waiting. Yes. No. We're going to have a photograph. Sonam Wangchuk, founder and president of the board of SECMOL. Thank you for, again, inspiring us, not just with your words, but with your actions. And of course, last but not the least, Dr. Shannon Olson, Global Director of the ECHO Network, for closing us off by asking us to listen. We'll take a quick photograph with all of you on stage. And to wrap up the proceedings, may I request Ms. Inam Gambhir, co-chair of the Development Working Group, to please wrap this up with your concluding remarks. Thank you, Ms. Gambhir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Arunabha. Thank you very much, colleagues. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of the G20 Sherpa, the entire G20 Secretariat, for today's discussions, all the speakers, moderators, the G20 delegates, participants with this amazing, very insightful discussions. We heard our esteemed speakers, guests speak so insightfully. A few highlights stood out for me. The importance of connection with nature as an anchor for a truly environmentally sustainable lifestyle. The need for a philosophy of trusteeship towards our future generations. The issue of underconsumption, poverty, inequality, the need to also address and take care of aspirations of our youth, which also, as we heard, are related to more and more consumption. The need for more inclusion in our discussions, for investing in people, exactly as LiFE, the concept of LiFE envisages. We've heard many inspiring talks today and very thought-provoking questions as well. I'm reminded here by what a mentor of mine told me, having more questions than answers is a good thing. That means that things need change, and curiosity that we heard today, it reflects that we all feel a sense of urgency towards this change. The one common thread that stood out for me throughout the discussions is that the concept of LiFE truly has the potential to bridge the distance between climate ambition, development agenda, and the action that we need to take to the last mile, to the individual. It is clear that to achieve our climate ambitions in a way that we can also achieve the sustainable development goals, we need a wide and complex web of policy frameworks and collaborations amongst all the various stakeholders to be able to see the action till the last mile. After all, for fueling and sustaining a pro-planet behavior, we will also need an ecosystem which does not continue to put the monetary burden of choosing a greener lifestyle on the consumer, on the individual. We need green development at scale. And we hope that in our work in the G20 Development Working Group and the wider G20 ecosystem, we will be able to power such collective actions going forward with the help of every one of you present here. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Ms. Gambhir, for articulating how the messages here and the examples we've discussed here could feed into the conversations that you and your colleagues are leading. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the conclusion of today's program. I hope the message you've taken away is that LiFE is not just about switching off that light switch. It is actually about individual action, catalyzing community action, catalyzing economy-wide action, catalyzing global cooperation. Do share this experience with your family and friends. They will put up the videos online, but for now, on behalf of India's G20 Secretariat and the knowledge partners, my organization, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, the United Nations Environment Programme, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and the One Planet Network. Thank you so much. And I wish you a very good evening and a safe journey home. For the G20 delegates and the special invitees and the speakers, my request is to you will see our CEEW colleagues who will usher you through gate 18. And for all the other members here in the hall, there's coffee for you outside, and I request that when you exit the building, you use exit number 20. I also would encourage the participants here to consider sustainability by recycling the lanyards that you have. There's a box for recycling just outside by the door. But of course, the G20 delegates, please hold on to it. We've got 2 more days of discussion that we've got to participate in. Once again, thank you for engaging, and here's to living sustainably. Thank you.